Yeah, it says we're live on my end.
Okay,
Are we live?
guys.
Do your thing.
It's okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Comic Boom here. My first ever live stream. Dark Knight Nation is my guest tonight. I guess he was. This is actually we're co-hosting this. Dark Knight Nation has been nice enough to, I guess, co-host. Well, he hosted, I guess, the other one. So this is my first attempt at a live stream on my own equipment. So hopefully everything will go well. Today's topic is let's. Has been nice enough to, I guess, co-host. Oh, he hosted, I guess. Sorry, I got some. Dark Knight Nation, I'll leave it to you. What do you have? Well, first we'll say hi to Tweakstert and Spike.
Hey guys, what's going on? How's it going?
Yeah. Dark Knight Nation. Yeah, go ahead. Say something.
Yeah, thank you for having me on today, brother. It's always nice chatting with you. And, it's cool to meet a bunch of new people who like to chat about comics. It's always good. I love the people that support me, but I always like talking to new people and getting new perspectives. And that's what this is all about. So thanks for, having me on the channel. Appreciate it, brother.
Yeah. And well, our topic for today was the current state of the DC universe. Now, this is obviously a huge topic, and I had to do my best Jeff Johns impression, of course. He doesn't wear glasses. I got the cap, I got the rings, right? It's like, come on, this is awesome. But I have fat and disgusting fingers, so unfortunately, all the rings, I don't know where the ring is, what fingers the ring is supposed to be worn on. I guess it depends on the ring bearer. But in any event, just like there's different emotions on the emotional spectrum, of course, there are different tones in the DC universe.
We normally do, right, our pull of the week too at the beginning before we jump into the topic, right?
That's right. And so before we start talking about the current state of the DC universe, we're going to talk about our current pull list. And so, Dark Knight, why don't you tell us what was your favorite or your suggested pull of the week?
Well, you know me, I'm usually pretty late to the party when it comes to reading my comics on time for the week. So, I've only read one comic this week, but there's always comics, to be anticipated. The comic I actually read this week that I really enjoyed was Detective number 988, written by James Robinson, art by Steven Segovia. The highlight of this book was by far the artwork, man. Like, Steven Segovia is like, I mean, I think I could consider him a hidden gem. I wouldn't say he's a superstar. I think most people that are firm readers of comics know who he is, but man, the dude's solid. Like, his artwork is great. And seeing him in Gotham again is just a sight for sore eyes,
we were talking earlier about that too, and Steven Segovia did a masterful job. He was with James Robinson on James Robinson 21 issue Wonder Woman run. He was basically the highlight because despite some issues I had with James Robinson's writing of Wonder Woman during that whole Darkseid, when she fought Darkseid throughout her run, and there was other adventures she had, the art was fantastic. There was never any issues with the art, and especially when Segovia was behind the pencils.
Yeah, no, I mean, Segovia is top notch. The story is fairly solid so far. I don't want to spoil too much, but we're getting to see a couple C and D list villains out of Gotham again, which is always a joy for me. I love when the little guys get a spotlight. Batman has such a big rogues gallery, and inarguably the best rogues gallery in all of comics. That's right, I said it. So it's really cool getting to see guys like that. You get to see a little bit of Bruce and Alfred love, which is a big thing for me. Alfred's my favorite supporting character in comics. Don't at me. But it's just a nice, cool little detective story in Gotham, and it's good to see that, especially with how Tom King's Batman's been going, which lately has been fairly decent compared to the great majority of his run, in my opinion. But it was solid. James Robinson does a good job at capturing the voices. I had brought it up earlier with Comic Boom here in our pre-show chat. I was like, well, there's this one thing that I thought was going to be a problem, but totally wasn't, because James Robinson pretty much addressed it in the script. So, I can't complain about that. And I guess just to give Marvel a little bit of love, they're actually reprinting some Marvel Knights #1s. or a couple of them.
Or
And they're
yeah,
reprinting Daredevil and the Defenders, like as a in the True Believer series. It's obviously not anything new, but like if you guys haven't read Marvel Knights Daredevil, go check it out. Solid stuff. If I'm not mistaken, it's what Kevin Smith and Joe Quesada.
on the Daredevil one, yeah.
Yeah, and the Marvel Knights Daredevil. So go check that out, man. It's something to check out. What about you, man? What is your pick of the week?
Well, actually, the pick of the week actually has to do, and again, it's sort of carrying on with this theme with the rings and everything else. Ahoy Comics came out with it's the first issue called "The Wrong Earth," and I got a picture of it here. This is portraying. It's written by Tom Pear. The artist is Jamal Engel, and it's a great story. It has to do with Dragonfly Man, or rather, Dragonfly and Dragonfly Man. He's called Dragonfly Man on the one Earth, and he on an alternate Earth he's known as Dragonfly. And what's funny about it is that think of the it's sort of like imagine Batman 66 crossing over into a Dark Knight Frank Miller Batman world.
That's interesting.
It's really good. It's very jarring because imagine this vanilla sky Batman 66, every lovey-dovey, very black and white sort of justice, crossing over into a dark and gloomy and hard world where in one world Dragonfly's a hero and the police love him, and the other one he's like the rogue Batman that everyone hates. And anyways, they end up their lives get crossed, and it's actually really good. It's really entertaining, and it's $3.99. It's really good, and there's even a backup tale by a backup article by Grant Morrison, and there's further backup tales and advertising for other issues. I mean, I'm telling you, this along with Alterna Comics, this is a Ahoy Comics. I don't know. I've never heard of them before.
Yeah, I've never heard of them either.
It's really good.
That's awesome.
But yeah, that's it here. And if I'm giving Marvel some love, because we'll be talking about DC ad nauseum, obviously, but giving Marvel some love, I'm really enjoying Infinity Wars issue 3. This continues the story of Infinity Wars with Gamora, now known as Requiem. She's got the Infinity Stones and and what she does with them. The plot thickens, let's put it that way, and a lot of the heroes are merging, and it's very, very interesting. And just to give a tease, where Thanos destroyed half of all life in the universe, she does something unique. She actually folds all life in half. That's why Captain America is merged with Stephen Strange, and that's why Spider-Man is merged with other she merged all the life together. She's folded life in half instead of destroying half of it. It's very interesting.
I saw some promotions for like the Soldier Supreme, and I was wondering what that was all about. That's pretty interesting.
It is. It's good. Gary Duggan's been doing a pretty good job, and it's kind of a surprisingly unique take, I think. So it's interesting. It's good.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that's really, really cool, man. I'll probably check it out once it's in trade. I'm already behind on the books that I normally pick up, so I'll have to wait on that. But so yeah, I guess like the question I'd have to pose is, if I may, the people in the chat, like what are you guys reading right now that you're excited about? What came out this week that you're pumped about?
I know, Tweakster to ask, can you explain Steve Orlando's Wonder Woman? I can Tweakster, if I can answer that question, I tell you exactly what's happened in Steve Orlando's Wonder Woman in the first 2 issues. I think it's very confusing writing. I think that Steve Orlando could be writing it better. It needs more clarity. I find it somewhat confusing. To be honest with you, I think it's fair to say that rather than me waste 30 minutes to try to do it, I would just tell you to go to my videos where I try to make sense of them, because I got like 15, 20-minute videos per issue. They're 3 issues in. The third Orlando issue came out, or is it the 4th one came out? And it's I find it that the first 2 were really, they should have been more clear. I think Steve Orlando is one of the started off as a bright spot in the DC universe, and unfortunately he's I think he's really soiling it. Do you read Wonder Woman Dark Knight?
I was, and then when I saw Steve Orlando's name on the front of the book, I decided to put a pause on Wonder Woman until the Justice League Dark tie-ins.
Yeah.
Steve Orlando, I really gave a chance. His Midnighter was really solid. I honestly haven't read anything great from him after that. The JLA Rebirth one-shots were fine. But
Yeah.
then once he actually got to JLA, it was just so static and boring. And the way he writes characters, like that, he doesn't get dialogue. He ultimately doesn't get characterizations, especially like when he did that Night of the Monster Men really like sullied him for me. And I don't know if you saw this yet. They just announced that Steve Orlando is writing a 12-issue Martian Manhunter maxi series with Riley Rossmo on art. And that's a real bummer because if literally any other two people were on that book, I'd probably read it. But I don't care for Orlando. I think his writing is really boring. I haven't read anything good from him in a while. I challenge somebody to give me something that is objectively good, not tastefully good, like a well-written book, and like try to differentiate your own tastes versus what is a decent book, a well-written story. And true characterization. And Riley Rossmo's art is just not. I don't dig it. It's not my style.
What surprises me about that is because and that's tying into the sort of the current state of the DC universe right now is he's one guy that with respect to tone, Steve Orlando, when he wrote Midnighter and Apollo, that series was hardcore. I mean, there was violence in there that was crazy. He really raised the violent threshold on that, and he actually made it a convincing love story between the two men, where literally Midnighter goes to hell and fights Neuron, and it was a real kick-ass story. And but I don't know what it is, but I totally agree with you. Everything else, he's so by the numbers. He's so predictable. He doesn't take any chances. It's so Vanilla Sky. It's so no chances. It's just very, very forgettable. And I don't know why. Martian Manhunter right now is such an interesting character. The way Scott Snyder is hinting at some of the things in Justice League about his background, to have knowing that Orlando was writing Martian Manhunter, I got to agree, it's very disappointing. My expectations are very, very low because, yeah, although I like the artist, I don't mind the artist.
I like Rossmo for me is just not a superhero comic book artist. Like I liked him. He did like a small run on Constantine during the New 52, which I thought was fine. And Night of the Monster Men was ultimately pretty disappointing. When I saw his artwork in the Batman Who Laughs, I was probably the most disappointed I've ever been in art on a like mainstream comic book. Yep. And like then you have like his surprise random issue in Justice League No Justice, which like comparing that to Francis Manapul is like when I got to that issue, you can talk to like anybody. When I got to that issue, it took me 2 weeks to get through it because I would read about 3 pages in and just could not deal with how bad Rossmo's art was, in my opinion, compared to Manapul. I had to stop. And then once I got myself like moving on that train, I realized he only drew half the issue and I was able to get through it. But, I don't want him on Martian Manhunter. Ultimately it's like there is no redeeming quality to this book for me right now. Will I pick up the first couple of issues? Probably. I do comic book YouTube and I can't always read books that I love, I suppose.
Some okie dude commented about Midnighter. He's an even more crazier version of Agent Douchebag from Ozark.
I don't know what that is.
I'm not familiar with the reference, but Agent Douchebag from Ozark. Sounds like something to read once.
I don't know who that is. Like if honestly too, if you were to like, oh, what's my like, and I want to ask you too. Give me a creative team for a Martian Manhunter book. Obviously, don't want to spend too much time on this, but quick, like first thing comes to mind. What's your team on a Martian Manhunter book?
Actually, I would love to see a Grant Morrison take on a Martian Manhunter. I would love a Grant Morrison take, or even DarkKnight. A DarkKnight, something unique and fresh.
Yeah.
that you know it's going to be out there. DeConnick and Morrison. I mean, Martian Manhunter needs something different. He needs to stand out differently than Superman. He needs somebody to really rock his world, rock the boat, so to speak. And Morrison, or I can see Morrison or DeConnick doing it. Just something out there, somebody that's going to maybe take a chance. And yeah, that's who I would go with.
Yeah. I had an idea and then you changed it. I'm going with Grant Morrison. That's a good pick. I can't honestly think of anybody else who would do a better job, especially because he's the one that really propelled John Jones in his JLA run more than anybody else.
Yeah.
So
actually,
yeah,
some Okie dude also suggested Peter Milligan or Grant Morrison. Peter Milligan is a good writer as well, so that's pretty choice.
yeah. I mean, I'm gonna firm stick on Grant Morrison. Art duties, Ivan Reis, man. Ivan Reis draws some really good organic. Like obviously it's superhero comics, so there's going to be stuff out of proportions, but like he finds a good balance of superhero, you know, grandiose out of, you know what I mean, like the Superman physique, with these more organic lines and softer shapes. So Grant Morrison, Ivan Reis, Martian Manhunter.
No,
I'm with it.
I think that's great too, and because Martian Manhunter, you know, he's always sort of the darker. He's the dark brooding type, but in many ways, Martian Manhunter is really the heart and soul of the DC universe in so many ways. But he's you know, I always remember when he died. I remember, you know, when Batman brought Oreo cookies to his grave, and I forget what series that was, and you know, or that was when they were all praying for a resurrection, and that was right before Final Crisis when he was killed by Martian Manhunter was killed by some insignificant villain, but in any event, but yeah, he's an underused character. We do have a question here. Tehillim29 says, if you want Martian Manhunter ruined, get Bendis to write it.
Oh my God. Don't get me started on a Superman. That'll be a topic of, I think that'd be a good topic of conversation after he finishes his first arc on Superman and action. That would be a good episode of Let's Talk Comics.
Spike makes a good comment. He says Martian Manhunter is a philosopher type like DC's Silver Surfer. And I think that's a very good point. Actually, you know what? Come to think of it, I really love Dan Slott's Silver Surfer. It was a very, very good character-driven series. I would love to see sort of a Silver Surfer, Martian Manhunter exploring the universe type, sort of elevating Martian Manhunter. I think that would be a pretty cool idea.
I agree. That's a really cool idea. But you know, I'm not going to go in on Bendis' Superman right now. I'm going to get off on a tangent. So,
yeah. There's one other question. Spike asks, do we think Wildstorm is being mismanaged now that it's been compressed into a title? I collect. I'll go first, Dark Knight. I don't know if you collect Wildstorm, but I collect both Michael Creighton. It's Michael Creighton.
Michael Cray, yeah.
Michael Cray, sorry, and also Wildstorm itself. I really enjoyed it. I still enjoy it. It's on the 11th issue. There's one issue that remains from Michael Cray. I think it's well written. Well, Brian Edward Hill actually writes
Michael Cray. Yeah.
And I'm really curious to see what the final battle between Michael Cray and Diana, the Wonder Woman version in the Wildstorm universe, is going to be. That's been really built up, and John Constantine and Diana Wonder Woman are the villains. I think it's very well done. Do I think that Wildstorm is being mismanaged? Well, I'm enjoying the title, Spike. I would say this. I'm enjoying the stories. I wish the stories could be a little bit. I wish they would go longer. I wish the art was better in Michael Cray. I think artistically it could be better. Even Wildstorm maybe. But I'm enjoying Wildstorm. Michael Cray maybe could be a little bit better artistically, but I'm enjoying the story. So I don't think Wildstorm is popular enough titles to go beyond maybe the 2 titles. Although I would love to see Danger Girl return. J. Scott Campbell on Danger Girl, the classic. Well, I would love that. But what do you think, Dark Knight?
Well, I mean, I don't really have a lot of exposure to the Wildstorm universe. My honest to God first exposure was Flashpoint. to the Wildstorm characters. Right. But with that being said, you know, I've heard good things about the Wildstorm main title, but that it was a bit of a slow burn. However, I will say I have read a bit of Michael Cray. For those of you who don't know, I did an interview with the writer of Michael Cray, and he's had a Detective Comics art, and he will be writing Batman and the Outsiders book come December. But I read Michael Cray in preparation for the interview, at least like the first 3 or 4 issues, and I dug the hell out of it. Like, I have little to no context. I don't know who Michael Cray is. I don't know if, you know, because I know Wildstorm characters have appeared in the main DC universe, so I don't know if it's a totally different universe, if there's drugs or you know, I would say like telepathic powers involved that are changing what he's interpreting things as. I honestly don't give a shit. I really enjoyed what I've read so far. Like I said, I've read, you know, about 3 or 4 issues, so I'm not all the way through. And like I said, if I continue to do so, I'm sure some of those answers will be cleared up. But I dig Michael Cray, but I don't think that I'm necessarily at liberty to compare what Wildstorm is now versus what it was in the past.
Just a quick Spike clarified that Danger Girl actually is apparently at IDW now, is no longer at the Wildstorm universe. I did not know that. I've not really been following it. It's been a while since I followed it, but I will give a shout out to if you can get the absolute edition of Danger Girl, it's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. But
interesting.
Yeah. So okay. Well, why don't we get started on our main? We kind of got started on it already, but why don't we get started on our topic? And that is basically what's the current state of the DC universe. I know that when Dark Knight Nation and I were talking about, when we were debating what topics to talk about, Dark Knight Nation rightly said, well, you know, let's keep the title simple, the current state of the DC universe. I sort of had this idea of, you know, like, you know, the rainbow tones of the DC universe, because, you know, we're reading all these articles with the Conic on Aquaman, and with J. Willow Wilson on Wonder Woman coming up, Grant Morrison on Green Lantern, Scott Snyder on Justice League, Venditti on Hawkman. Having read all the articles, there are in fact some very common themes going on here, and in fact, I feel much more confident going forward with the DC universe than I did. I've been sort of a negative Nelly, so to speak, in past broadcasts, feeling that the sense of DC Rebirth has been lost. I no longer think it's completely lost. I really think that there's been literally a rainbow. There's just a rainbow of different tones that we're going to be subjected to in the months and next couple of years that follow. And that's my impression from reading all the articles. Dark Knight, what do you think?
You know, I partly agree with you. I think that things have been getting a little bit too mixed between, you know, deciding, I guess, what ultimately has a bigger effect on DC's continuity between Metal and the results of Metal, and by, you know, leading into the Justice League title, or Doomsday Clock, because there's these 2 great narratives that were running parallel to one another. You had the Dark Multiverse stuff, and you had the Watchmen entering the DC universe. And I think things were starting to get really confusing, and I think we've gotten to the point where once the DC offices had settled on the fact that Doomsday Clock was going to be shipping at half the speed, I'm sure they were just like, whatever the hell you guys are doing, just keep doing it. Don't wait on us. And, you know, it's unfortunate, because I think that the overall, and I hate to say it because I love Snyder, but I think that the overall narrative that Jeff Johns was crafting for the DC universe via Doomsday Clock and the little threads that were coming through in a lot of the books throughout the last 2 years were much more cohesive and much more interesting than what Snyder is doing right now, and how he's helping shape it with you know, Justice League upon other things. I'm not saying we haven't gotten positive things out of it. I love Hawkman. I love Justice League Dark, but you know, it just seems sloppy.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because obviously we'll have to withhold judgment until we get the full Snyder run. But the interview that Scott Snyder gave with Comic Historian was very interesting, because he sort of first of all, Scott Snyder is someone, he takes full responsibility for any continuity errors he makes. He takes full responsibility for that. So he's very self-effacing in that respect. He said that when he made the pitch for Metal, he had to make the pitch to corporate types, to the guys that make the toys, to the companies that make the toys, and all the licensed products, and he had to explain to them Metal, and he jokingly said, and I sympathize with him. I mean, he's trying to explain. I mean, imagine trying to explain the plot to someone who rarely reads comic books. I mean, we're seasoned comic book readers, and me trying to explain Metal to somebody who's never read a comic book, that's challenging.
It's not easy.
It's not easy. It isn't. And but that's what Snyder did, and he actually wanted more time to draw out that story, and DC told him they wanted to avoid basically a secret empire. They didn't want to have they didn't want to have an unrestrained event that. So they basically said, they forced him to keep it into 6 issues and just have those ancillary one-shots. And that actually worked out very, very well. The only regret he had was that he had to kill off the Red Death, sort of the Batman Flash character. He had to kill off that character in one of the side issues, not in the main issue.
The main title.
Itself. But so that, what's interesting about that is now, DC sort of restricts, that was a phenomenally successful event with Metal. And now, despite having that success, DC says to Snyder, well, they're sort of saying, okay, well, now you got carte blanche. Now tell your 50-issue Justice League arc. I mean, good Lord. I mean, that's a long time. And, but I guess at the end of the day, and I'll just make a quick point and I'll let you jump in, is at the end of the day, look, it sells. I mean, God damn it, it's in the top 3. Batman, Tom King on Batman, I might be a little depressed where we have to go through 103 issues of it, but when the fact is that the guy has moments of sheer glory. When he has one phenomenal issue that will, it'll make me happy, even though it's followed by 5 stinkers. He'll every now and then come out with one I love, and let's face it, he sells a lot of comics, and so does Snyder on Justice League, and
it's the state of DC right now is a little bit, and Metal is a little bit of a sore topic because I wanted so much more out of it. The thing that bothers me is that if you had slimmed down on the random tie-ins and maybe put 1 or 2 more main Metal books out, that would have been the way to do it. Marketing wise, story wise, between all the tie-ins and the one-shots and the mainline book, you had probably somewhere near 30 issues, and you're telling me you couldn't tell a story in 30 issues? Because I mean, if to be real, like, some of those tie-ins really mattered. Like the Gotham Resistance tie-ins really mattered to the story. It's a part of the narrative. And like, I'm going to try to restrain myself from going on a tangent. But the fact that book really didn't have a good ending, the story didn't have an ending after 30 issues of comic books, is a problem. It's a serious problem. And it ultimately feeds into the one thing that, I didn't really want to believe about Scott Snyder, was that a lot of people were talking about how he doesn't really know how to end stories. And I had never really noticed it before. And I was like, nah, man, like his Batman was good. Like, his Witches was solid. His Vertigo stuff was great. And then like that happened. And I'm like, wow, what a buzzkill. I mean, you don't see the villain being defeated. You waste page time on that dance party in the manor that some people loved. And that's great. But like, is it ultimately indicative of the tone of the DC universe right now, that little dance party? No, it's not. The DC universe is dark and grim, and we have all these things bleeding through the multiverse. And again, like we've had a discussion on this regarding to the New Age of Heroes, is that ultimately didn't spin out of Metal. I probably can't blame Snyder for that. It's DC's marketing. But in regards strictly to Metal and how that affects the DC universe, is like, the story was so unresolved. And then you go into No Justice, which is like, I admire, Snyder attempting to pull some Jack Kirby craziness, but he's not playing to his strengths at all for me. His strengths in Metal were when we got into the crazy horror aspect of everything. You know what I mean? Like the Dark Days, the Forge, and the Casting, awesome books, awesome. Especially the casting, because you go into the history, and then you have, like, honestly, Batman Lost was my favorite book that came out of Metal.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think that there is a sense that there is a sense of Snyder sort of, you know, biting off more than he can chew, and it's not that he could probably chew it, but I mean, he doesn't. He really has to narrow the scope, and maybe he reminds me so much of Grant Morrison at his worst. Like Grant Morrison, in my view, when he's at his worst, he's got fantastic ideas, but he goes off on too many tangents with them.
Yeah.
And I think with Snyder, there's a danger there. Like we're only 7 issues into Justice League, and I love the concepts. I really do. I love the concepts that he's introduced. I just, you know, and he does say that Snyder's intention. Actually, he did state his intention. He was throwing everything at us in the first 7 issues. And then now it's going to be individual sort of 2-issue characters at a time arcs. And then it's going to broaden up a little bit. And they're going to sort of be a segue into DeConnick's Aquaman. And they're going to have some reference to King's Batman with Batman's broken legs, etc. And so, because apparently they are communicating. Snyder's talking with Bendis. Bendis is talking with King. So the editors at DC right now, according to Snyder, and this was also confirmed by one of DeConnick's interviews on Aquaman, is that it's almost like a gentlewoman's agreement that the writers are talking to each other, and the editors are saying, okay, guys, we'll let you worry about the continuity. You're doing a good job. Sales are okay. You know, gift us with something here. And the pro and the pro, what I love about that is it's every writer's dream. They have the freedom, and if they're hitting it out of the park, we fans love it. But on the other hand, you have the mistake, like you talked about earlier, is that when you end up with a mistake like Bendis made, and I don't even think you can fault Bendis for it, because Bendis, according to Snyder, loves collaboration. But Bendis does have a reputation, at least in the fans' minds, of sometimes doing his own thing, and he's not beholden to continuity. But when he in Superman, when he referenced Wally West instead of, it was supposed to be Barry Allen, that was definitely an editorial mistake. But it's right now, what I like about DC is that I sort of like that they're taking a chance that way, and it's going to work. It works better if writers are more orientated and they think like a Donny Cates and a Jeff Johns, who have an intuitive sense of continuity. They just know. They get it. They don't have to look it up because they know. And that's such a gift. That's so rare. And but Bendis has read a pile of Superman books. Snyder was saying that Bendis has been quoting stuff that he's read from past Superman books that Snyder hasn't even heard of. And so he basically is telling all of us to sort of, you know, things are going to be looking great for Superman. But just a quick comment. Spike shared a comment that I think is worthy, that I would love. I love action figures, and he said that it would be great if DC, when I was talking about Snyder giving a lecture to the corporate types and licensed products, that he should license with McFarlane Toys. Because can you imagine if McFarlane Toys was to do like the metal action figures? I would love that.
That'd be dope. I don't think that ever happened though, because DC I mean, they obviously don't have the same strained relationship that Marvel does with Todd McFarlane. But with today's techniques and action figures and the technology with the molds and everything else, it'd be a little pricey, but it would be pretty cool. No, it'd be awesome. I lost my train of thought real quick.
I'll just add. Spike commented that he thinks editorial and corporate put a lot of pressure on the shoulders of their big stars, and that's how they burned out Jeff Johns, in his opinion. And there might even be some truth to that. I don't know, because I know Jeff Johns was obviously distracted, and he when he became the chief creative officer, it was kind of odd that he seemed to orientate more toward the movies or maybe the TV shows. And,
from what I understand, the position of chief creative officer is to oversee the adaptations of the comic books in other media, more so than creatively overseeing the DC universe's narrative. I don't necessarily think Johns was burnt out from comic books. I think he was probably burnt out of having this position in the DC cinematic universe, and ultimately the corporate heads, probably not giving him his fair share of say in things. Because to be honest with you, like Wonder Woman, you could tell John's assisted in the script and that he gets credit for assisting in the script, but then they're like, John's also helped produce this and that and that. And I was like, honestly, I don't see any touch of Jeff Johns in that movie. I don't think Jeff Johns would let Superman be treated the way he was for the most part in the DC cinematic universe. So I think he was just there as an advisor that people could choose to or not to listen to. When it comes to comic books, I'm so ecstatic that Jeff Johns is returning to the role of the creative, and I hope that he can still have that, and I'm sure he will, due to notoriety alone, still have that presence in the DC Writers Summit, where he can assist in the overall crafting between these stories. When it comes to Justice League, because obviously that's the big trendsetter of the DC universe right now, I really hope these first 7 arcs were exactly what Snyder had said on that interview, and that it's just him throwing stuff at the wall. I've seen the interview, and I hope he really starts fine-tune focusing. But to be honest, like with all of this collaboration, I almost feel that Snyder's picked up the flaws of some of his partners in crime. Like you said, he's writing a lot like a Grant Morrison when Grant Morrison is kind of spinning too many wheels at once. He's writing dialogue not as bad as Bendis and Man of Steel, but quite bad, where he straight up doesn't seem to understand some of these characters. And again, I don't know if that's another editorial thing because of what's going on with, like, for me, like his Batman in Justice League pales in comparison to his Batman in the main series book. And I understand that Batman isn't going to be the highlight, but you can still, find a way to incorporate the character in the team book. Like, you ultimately want Batman. I don't want somebody else as Batman. I want Batman as Batman.
Yeah, he deliberately underplayed Batman because he's when he did Justice League, and he did that on purpose. He was trying to focus more on the other characters. So,
well, I don't mind like underplaying him in the story. What I do mind is that it's just not Batman. The character is not the same Batman that he wrote in his New 52 run. He makes these random, like, forced jokes because Batman needs to joke and everybody needs to joke. Like, leave the joking to somebody else, and if you have Batman do it, make it very dry or blunt, or him just kind of being an asshole. That's one thing that seriously bothers me, is like the characterization. I hate the way he writes Barry Allen. I despise it. I really don't like it. He makes him kind of like a young, like, kind of always on the fly kind of guy. And like Barry is the most centered out of all of the Flashes, at least the ones that currently exist in the Earth, the main Earth. When you write a team book, I understand it's difficult to balance these characters and again, balancing their importance in the story, but characterization in a team book is key. A story, I think, can kind of be average, but as long as you get the characters and you understand who they are, with room for some interpretation, you will always come out on top. And I think that's one of the biggest issues with his thing, and I with his Justice League, and I hope it is just an issue of him throwing everything at the wall. And I really hope these character focuses that we get are true to the characters that we know and love. Yeah. That's all I can want. And
I think that's what's gonna. I choose to believe that that's what's going to happen, because we know that when he focuses on character, I mean, Snyder's can do a pretty good job when he combines sort of a horror element with characterization. I think clearly he showed that with his Batman run, because I mean, with Court of Owls, sort of had like horror elements to it. There was great characterization there.
Absolutely.
And I think we can all draw some optimism and some hope in terms of the writing from comments that Snyder made. He said, and I quote, "We know 100% of what is coming up." And he said, if the storytelling screws up continuity, that's on us. He says there's no discord between us. And by us, he meant his fellow writers. So apparently they are communicating, and apparently they do know what's coming up in each other's books. And I'm always, sometimes I got to say, part of me calls BS on that, because or at the very least, I think the person that is the biggest rebel in that little cabal there is probably Tom King, because Tom King just so often. Tom King ignores what he does in previous issues on sometimes. So he's not going to, he's not going to be beholden to something Bendis does. I mean, honestly, I would happily make I'd make $100 bet right now that within the next 3 months there's going to be a continuity there in Batman, in Tom King's Batman. And
I mean, he did it between the he did it between the damn like wedding prelude issues that were meant to set up his wedding and the wedding. They were in the same month. The books were meant to set up the okay. I'm not going to go too far off on that because we've done it before. But no, the thing that makes me a little bit intolerant to Snyder's words is that he said the same thing about Metal. He said the same exact thing about Metal. We know what we're doing. We've had this plan for years. And I love Scott Snyder to death, man. But like when he goes out in public, I don't trust a word he says. I don't, because he will, and it's good for him to support his colleagues, and I can respect that on a level. But even if a book is straight bad, he'll go out on Twitter and be like, "This book is great. You all need to be picking this up." And I knew that wholeheartedly. I think it was like Man of Steel issue 3 or 4, whichever issue it was by far the worst book I've read in the last 3-4 years of reading comic books. Like it was so bad. And Snyder like goes out on Twitter and promotes it. And as like I said, I understand, man, like you want to support your colleagues and you're trying to build relationships with them, but don't tell me that an objectively terrible book is good. And again, I think that, to a certain degree, people that are conscious of what's going on in storytelling and in general, whether it be comic books, movies, or novels, or, elsewhere, you should have a certain idea of what is objectively a well-written story and what just you don't personally like. There are stories, again, like, for example, if I out there, I saw A Quiet Place and I saw Spider-Man Homecoming. Yeah. I liked Spider-Man Homecoming more than I liked A Quiet Place, but A Quiet Place, I think, is inarguably a better movie than Spider-Man Homecoming. It's just better crafted. And I think that it's difficult because most people don't know where to draw that line. What they like is what's good and what they don't like is not. And obviously there's always going to be some intersection of bias, no matter how aware you are. I'm not trying to make myself sound like this, this comic book educator. But I think that to really look at stuff like this, there needs to be that separation. And when Snyder goes out and says things like that, along with, again, repeating the words from Metal regarding his Justice League and what's going on in the books that tie into that, it's just like I can't wholeheartedly get behind what he's saying and believe in it.
I completely agree with you, and I know where you're coming from. And I guess this is sort of the, I almost feel here's the disconnect. I mean, you get seasoned collectors like yourself and I, and the fact of the matter is that we're going to buy these. Let's be blunt. We're probably going to buy Justice League regardless of, because it's just we're diehard collectors and we're addicted. Yeah. You probably should see us.
I bought all of Brian Hitch's Justice League, man.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it is what exactly, and that frankly was terrible storytelling, but it was fantastic art. Brian Hitch's Justice League, but what the thing is, it sells so well, and as it continues to sell, they're going to continue to let him do his thing. And the other thing is, we've been hard on Snyder here. Let me sing his praises a little bit. I'm a firm believer, and Snyder is too, I'm sure, that if you're going to fail epically. Like fail on a spectacular storyline as opposed to just failing on a mediocre little storyline. He really is crafting something huge here. I mean, he teased we're going to be getting Superboy Prime out of the source wall. Teased that coming up. We're going to be getting Darkseid's father out of the source wall coming up. He then teased something else, which very few people have talked about. He said, and I quote, Kyle Rayner's experience with the source wall.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what is Kyle Rayner's experience with the Force Wall? Because this leads into a rumor. Is Kyle Rayner going to be killed in Heroes in Crisis? Maybe he's not going to be killed in Heroes in Crisis. On the other hand, if he is killed in Heroes in Crisis, Kyle Rayner did used to have a connection as a White Lantern with that power of what, you know, white life force.
Yeah, with the Source, yeah.
You know, maybe he'll end up with the Source Wall somehow. This is big ticket stuff. And when you hear Superboy Prime, I wasn't a big Superboy Prime fan, but I can't deny the attraction of him as a character. This is big stuff coming up. Also, a quick comment. He made a comment about Metal. One of the things that he wanted to introduce in Metal that he never had enough time for, in other words, not enough issues, because DC editorial said, you're staying at 6. But he wanted to introduce a 53rd world.
Well, now he did briefly.
Well, but he wanted to go into it. He wanted to create a whole new art. Like, he wanted to go into more detail on what that involved. And well, I don't know what it was, but he has plans for the 53rd world, and he wasn't able to do what he wanted to in Metal.
If I'm not mistaken, the 53rd Earth, as cited at the end of Metal, is like an Earth where all of the heroes are chimps. Like that was because you remember when, like,
I don't remember that. No,
they were like bringing, you know, like this entire like battalion across the multiverse to battle Barbatos, and you see I remember seeing like Dark Knight Returns Batman. There's like a Batman chimp and like something else. And it was like Earth 53. And it shows like a couple of I might be mistaken. Somebody could correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure that I think it's just alluding to the fact that there's more than 52, 53 Earths, you know, in the multiverse right now. It is again, where I think he's just approaching the concept that there is nearly an infinitesimal amount of Earths in the multiverse again, rather than just saying, oh, no, we're just adding one more. And, you know, I feel like I constantly say Scott Snyder's one of my favorite writers, and yet I keep like shitting on him all over the internet, which probably isn't good. I love the ideas that he presents in comics, and I absolutely love the fact that he finds a way to tie these huge epic stories into these very philosophical and emotional themes. You know what I mean? Like his Justice League is ultimately about embracing and stepping past the unknown, or the things that we're most afraid of, or like being afraid of possibility. Yeah. And I think that it's very powerful. And he does that in everything that he writes. He makes himself so incredibly vulnerable in every single story that he writes.
And that's what he's doing with the 7 forces. He's got the Speed Force and the Still Force. The next 2 forces that are going to be dealt with in Justice League they're going to focus on Wonder Woman and Aquaman, and the difference between divinity and magic. So the next 2 forces have something to do with divinity, the difference between divinity and magic, and they're going to be juxtaposed against the Cheetah and Black Manta. And it's very interesting, and I really like the fact that that'll be a sort of a segue into J. Willow Wilson's Wonder Woman. And I'm not exactly sure, because J. Willow Wilson, I'm sure, is going to have some similar theme related to divinity, because I know that Aquaman, according to an interview that Kelly Sue DeConnick gave, she's going to be focusing more on she'll be focusing on building up. It's going to be like Aquaman Year One, like Batman Year One for Aquaman, and it's all building on those themes. And yeah, this is what I mean before when I said earlier that I was thinking one-dimensionally before, and what I like what the more I'm reading and the more I'm, you know, even my frustration with Justice League. My frustration with Justice League, it's with the clarity in the first 7 issues. It's not with the ideas. I love the ideas, and even Grant Morrison's Final Crisis, I thought was maybe poorly executed, but it was a fantastic ideas. I mean, so I don't. That's why I say I have a lot of hope here. There's that word again, hope. I do have a lot of hope, I think. And Snyder says that he said there's so much great spirit right now at DC. Everyone's happy. The writers are happy. Everyone's getting along. It's a wonderful spirit. And he actually drew a comparison between that and the spirit when he was in the New 52. He said he never mentioned names, but he said during the New 52. And by the way, during the New 52, he was writing Swamp Thing and Animal Man with the green and with the red. He stated more than once.
Well, I mean, he wrote Swamp Thing. I know Jeff Lemire did a good portion of New 52 Animal Man. I don't know if Scott Snyder did Animal Man.
Well, I know
Like
they had a crossover.
crossover, yeah.
Right, right. So I might stand to be corrected on all that he did, but in any event, he said that he remembers getting into lots of arguments and frustrations during the New 52 era, and so the fact that he even sort of hinted at that, I mean, I remember DC. I mean, there's even a website that said, how many days it was since DC editorial last screwed up. There's actually a website dedicated to DC editorial screw ups during the New 52 era because it was disastrous. It was absolutely disastrous, and people don't realize how lucky we are right now during this rebirth era, or whatever this era is called. Like, if it's not rebirth, no one's penned a name for this era yet. We should come up with a name for it and take credit for it, but I can't think of a name. But if this isn't a rebirth era, maybe I'll ask people in the chat, guys in the chat, if we're not in the DC rebirth era, what is a good name for the current era of the DC universe?
The No Justice era.
The No Justice era, or I don't know. That's why I was suggesting even like the Rainbow era, because I really do think we're starting to get a rainbow of tones. We got the Super Sons with the Hope. If you look at the colors of the rainbow, for blue, it could probably be Superman. For green, we could even go Green Lantern with the themes that Morrison's going with. I really like what I'm seeing right now in the DC universe. And it's because now we're sort of in the infancy stage. Okay, everybody, we had a rebirth, we had a resurrection. Now we're sort of in that infancy stage.
I think it's a level of growth. You know what I mean? That was the rebirth, the resurrection. This is the growth period. And just kind of like finishing off on like what I was saying about Snyder, I 100% agree with the fact that the concepts he's introducing are incredibly interesting. And I love the fact that the 7 forces so far are ultimately, fears that most people have. Again, the ultraviolet core, the fear that sublimated emotions will come out and you won't be able to control them. The still force in a very fast-paced world. What happens when we really slow down and think about things? And we'll see the forces to come. But it's really interesting, emotionally, philosophically. My biggest problem, and it's because I am and over the years I've become such a stickler about the storytelling. I understand that you don't have to tell every story in a 3-act structure, and some of the best stories ever told completely ignore common act structure. But the characterization for me has been off. I think, again, the storytelling has been unclear. We had an entire conversation, about a week ago through Twitter, just talking about how like everything feels so out in the open. And again, maybe it is just a result of him throwing everything at the wall, and he's going to tie up the loose ends later in a nice little bow for us. But, I feel so uninformed about what's going on, and I feel like there's only so long I can wait. You know what I mean? Like, that's ultimately why Tom King's Batman largely is mediocre for me. And maybe it's a personal thing. Maybe I'm fine waiting. I just don't like waiting until the end to figure out something from 50 issues previous, that happens to be something huge and accented from the beginning.
There's a comment here in the Spike comment that sadly he says I think this is a post-Quesada Marvelization of DC. I think it's a very interesting observation by Spike, because whenever things get more real, Marvel's always had that reputation for being on the street mentality, always been a little bit more real, sort of the world next door, so to speak. That's Marvel Comics. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that there's a lot of reflection. I think the darkness in the DC universe, in many ways, do you think, Dark Knight, that maybe DC is sort of maybe trying to steal some of the real dark thunder that would normally be associated with Marvel?
I don't think that they're intentionally trying to steal it from Marvel. I like the assertion that he raises that it is definitely similar to a Joe Quesada Marvel. I I don't think that they're intentionally thinking, oh, we're going to steal some of the thunder, because ultimately everything right now is big and grand besides a handful of books. Everything is up and out there. The Flash is dealing with, the timeline and the right currently the Strength Force, but will continue to deal with how the Strength Force, the Sage Force, and the Still Force intertwine with the Speed Force. Justice League is Justice League. We've gone on quite a bit about that. We're gonna be getting Justice League Dark, which is huge. Odyssey is literally a space story. It's gonna be huge. Aquaman, right now has been pretty big with like the undertaking of Atlantis, and eventually whatever Pseudoconic does with it. Green Lantern, you know what I mean? It will hopefully be smaller scale, but how small scale can you really go with a space book? Uh, and speaking in regards to Grant Morrison, so I would say no, in the sense that I don't think it's this ground level. I don't think the overall tone of the DC universe is going to be pointing towards ground level storytelling, but I do see the similarities tonally with what DC is doing compared to a Joe Quesada involved Marvel.
Yeah, I actually think that it'd be interesting to hear Spike elaborate on that. He says, "I don't think they're trying to steal it, but I've seen these editorial and arc problems over there before, not caring about continuity, strong mandates." No, it's a good point. I mean, Spike has some experience. He's a script editor for, and he's done some work. So he's got experience in comic books, and he's done some work for Marvel, and he's a script editor, and so he's got experience with that, and in terms of when people maybe start not to care about continuity here and there. Mm-hmm. I think at the end of the day, it always depends upon. I mean, one gets a sense that there's a fly by seat of their pants when they're writing these comic books. I mean, if something works and it sells, I mean, naturally they're going to go with it. And
right. Their business, ultimately.
Exactly. I do pick up some similarities in tone. I actually, if just a quick comment in terms of the number of comic books right now that I'm enjoying, if I was to rank them on a scale of what from 1 to 10, probably 7. The top 6 out of my top 10 list right now are actually Marvel comics.
I'd agree.
Only maybe 3 are DC and 1 is an independent. And I actually really like Infinity Wars. I think Infinity Wars is doing like a dark galactic universal saga better than Justice League, than what's happening now in Justice League. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of potential, and what I'm hoping Scott Snyder can do is, I love the idea of 7 forces. To me, I draw the analogy. We have the 7 Infinity Stones, and I'm not saying I want them to copy Marvel, but there's something cool that what is the embodiment of the Still Force? What's the embodiment of the Speed Force? If there was some symbol that embodied it, other than just a doorknob that Lex Luthor held, I think that's kind of cool. You know what I mean? And I hope that's why I was so disappointed with the lack of clear explanation as to what the Speed Force versus the Still Force is, and I hope that when we hear about the difference between the divinity and the magic with Aquaman and Wonder Woman, I hope these aren't just ephemeral, crazy concepts, because I like what they're doing with Marvel with this Infinity Stones and how they can complete a circuit and how they're all linked, and I kind of hope that they have these 7 forces in the DC universe, because I hope that they elaborate on it, because quite frankly, I think the 7 forces in the DC universe, whatever they specifically are, I think those in fact will be the tones in the DC universe moving forward. And every story that is told will be reflective of one of those forces.
Mine is Batman.
What's that?
Mine is Tom King's Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I'm not reading Infinity Wars. I've been pretty fatigued with Marvel events over the last couple of years, so I decided to not pick this up, which seems to be to my detriment because everybody loves it. So, go me. But no, Marvel in this whatever you want to call it, fresh start initiative has been really kicking ass, man. Like, did I ever think I'd be reading a Hulk book and enjoying it? Yeah. No, I didn't give a shit about the Hulk, but I love the book. I'm loving Captain America. Thor, you know what I mean? It's Jason Aaron on Thor. Enough said. I've never cared more about Marvel than I do right now. And I've never enjoyed Marvel more than what I do right now. And again, they say comics is very yin and yang. There are very rare situations where you find both companies doing, hitting the same tier of content quality. It was for Rebirth, DC was leaps and bounds above Marvel. Right now, Marvel is I'd say a little bit more than slightly above DC. And I hope it doesn't continue to drop. I'd rather them both be somewhere in the center, but history hasn't proven that that's been a reoccurring trend. So we'll see. But yeah, Marvel's been killing it, man. Absolutely knocking it out of the park recently.
Yeah, we could certainly talk a lot about Marvel, but we'll stick to DC. That is the name of the topic. So that's my job. So there is one. I was thinking that we should probably, in terms of tone, why don't we talk about what do we talk about Green Lantern right now?
I was hoping you were going to say that.
Yeah, because I really like Dan Jurgens' latest run with John Stewart. I thought it was quite funny with John Stewart's latest run, or with John Stewart Green Lantern. I found it very interesting that he's dealing with a phantom ring, and it was this phantom ring that was sort of feeding his mind and sort of poisoning and corrupting the power battery, and it was sort of manipulating John into betraying the other lanterns, and
where
it was really
this was in Green Lanterns.
Yes, this was in and it was really Cyborg Superman.
Okay.
Yeah, it was really Cyborg Superman was actually controlling the Phantom Ring, and what I found funny is John Stewart didn't even realize that he was wearing the Phantom Ring. He didn't even know he was wearing it because it's a Phantom Ring. And what I find, and I remember reading Justice League #7 when the infrared ring, or the ultraviolet ring suddenly appeared on John's hands. I thought to myself, this guy's an idiot. That's like the second time he's, this guy could be wearing 3 rings and he doesn't even know it. He's a complete moron. How stupid can he be?
Yeah, before you stray too far from that part, it's happened 3 times because in the spoilers, the last issue of Justice League, his Green Lantern ring suddenly came back after it was broken.
I know. It's like, oh, look, I know, I'm not an idiot. I know exactly how many rings I'm wearing.
I mean, like in his, I mean, to be fair, I guess you can really, I would say only, give him the discredit of 2 because the ultraviolet ring doesn't seem to be physical. It's just like these weird glowy tribal patterns on his finger. But like, bro, how the hell do you not feel these things on your finger? Like, not to mention, like, you don't, I mean, I don't know. We don't always acknowledge our emotions, so maybe it's not fair to say you don't notice the sudden influx of this incredibly powerful emotion over others. But no, yeah, that's. I guess I just wanted to bring up that third misdirection there.
Yeah, but what I really, we talk about Grant Morrison before with his how he can have some crazy or fantastic concepts that are not always executed well. Well, we've talked before about his Green Lantern, his upcoming Green Lantern series. Liam Sharp, who's going to be the artist. Liam Sharp being the real good artist who did Brave and the Bold, and with Rebirth Wonder Woman with Greg Rucka. The idea of a space cop Green Lantern, that has some. It sounds interesting. What's even more interesting though is he's going to be exploring new powers for the ring, and in terms of that, it really is that it's more than just create something that you imagine. Apparently, it's going to be like almost like a fantasy or a wish fulfillment.
Well, I think it's always been that, to a degree. Sorry to cut you off. I realize it.
Oh.
But It's always been that too. I think people are taking it far too literally. I think when he said that, I think people are coming out here and thinking like a goddamn genie is going to fly out of the Green Lantern ring. It's always essentially been that if Green Lanterns in particular, if you will something to come into existence or to happen, the ring makes it happen. Like, for God's sake, Simon Baz reincarnated his brother-in-law.
Yeah.
Hal Jordan created his own ring out of pure willpower, whether or not you like it or not. He did it through sheer force of will. If you've read, and I'll be putting a review up of this later of the final issue of Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps, he wills the entire Dark Star army into believing in the good in people. He willed people to believe in something. It's almost like mind control. And that is like the ultimate wish fulfillment. I mean, it's different because of the way he had like channeled his willpower into them via like their telepathic connection, albeit, but like ultimately the Green Lantern ring, I think, has always been a source of wish fulfillment.
Yeah. And I think that in and of itself, I mean, the story potential there, it's just very surprising to me that type of story, way to approach a Green Lantern story, that maybe it's not done more often. Because I mean, from a purely ethical standpoint, is it ethical to even do that? I mean, normally it's, it's not ethical to impose your will on anybody. So the fact that a Green Lantern would impose his will through his ring is, I mean, there's all kinds of ethical questions to ask.
Well,
and
yeah. I mean, I see what you're saying. I think ultimately, though, what he had accomplished was lifting the hold of the Dark Star mantle and what it had on the army, and allowing people to act on their own free will rather than the emotions that are being amplified through the Dark Star mantle. That's how I interpreted it, as that he had lifted the control over it. So ultimately, I guess I can detract my statement of like making people do what they don't want to do, because that's what the Dark Star mantle did, and he kind of just lifted that off. But there's a lot of power in the concepts behind the Green Lantern ring, both philosophically and in the story, physically, so to speak. What Grant Morrison, I think, can do with a lot of the concepts that have been brought to him, and whatever he's going to integrate in his own right, I think is ultimately going to be really interesting. And the fact that he's kind of limiting himself to a more of like a beat cop exploring space, and kind of engaging more of the abilities of the Green Lantern ring, and maybe just the abilities that he alone has when wielding the ring, because he is, kind of proclamated widely as the best Green Lantern of all time. Go ahead.
I know he's going to be exploring, one of the issues is, the difference, what might be considered justice on our planet there might be a very different sense of what is justice on another planet. Almost like they never used this words, but I got the impression it was almost like, like the prime directive, so to speak, sort of respecting other cultures, what's right, imposing your own sense of right and wrong on another culture is likely wrong. And I would think that that's one of the benefits of having a ring that is so intelligent. The ring just seems to know so much because it has access to the all-knowing power battery, or the on Oa, or I guess on Mogo now.
On Mogo now, yeah.
Mogo, yeah. But I really think it's important that I love that idea, and I hope Grant Morrison he hints that he's going to go to a certain place, and where that place is Hal Jordan's personal life, and I mean sex life, because I can't believe this guy doesn't have a woman on every planet. You can't, even if there's 4 Green Lanterns patrolling Sector 2816.
2814, yeah.
2814, thank you. I mean, I can't believe there's no way this guy only has one girlfriend. Come on. Come on. I don't believe that for a second.
I would totally be down for that if at literally the last page of Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps, he wasn't re-embracing with Carol, because I think Carol is ultimately the one that ties him down. I'd like to see more of his relationship with Carol, and how that, because Jeff Johns played at that a lot during his Green Lantern run, especially in the New 52. Carol's like, this is why I can't be with you, Hal, because you care more about space than you care about me. So seeing that, that Grant Morrison seems to want to lighten the scale of things and as much as you can with a story that takes place in space. I'd like to see him come home to Carol, every couple of issues and just see how, their relationship is impacted, especially now that, the new 52 has been long gone, the 7 years since the reboot, even though Green Lantern got little to none in regards to a reboot. So like, it's not like how they approach the Flash, right? Like Barry Allen's relationship with Iris is very fresh and new. But because of the lack of rebooting in the Green Lantern mythos, Hal Jordan's relationship with Carol Ferris is anything but, even in the romantic sense, not just by association. So I'm curious to see, if she reacts to things differently now and how Hal Jordan approaches things. And I'm sure, Hal Jordan seemed to mature in how he handles things with the Corps. He declined the role of leader and left that up to John Stewart because he's ultimately aware that he serves better as an agent of the Corps rather than leading the Corps. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I think the art's going to be fantastic. One of the things I really like about Liam Sharp's art is that he uses a lot of line work for detailing. And I think with the vast, ocean of creatures that he can draw are going to look insane. They're going to look so freaking cool. And I think we're going to see things that we haven't seen before. Like he's released some of his pages that are just inked. And I'm like, this looks great. This story is going to look beautiful. Like, say what you want about the story, at least we know it's going to look good.
Yeah, hearing Grant Morrison's ideas thematically, what he wants to try to attain, Liam Sharp is the perfect artist for him. It really is. It's, again, I wouldn't have guessed how Liam Sharp, he's really good at drawing mythological places like on Ternanog in the pages of Brave and the Bold, which is Irish folklore, and he's extremely detailed. It's really nice to see him use his talents to draw space and planets and supernovas and black holes and whatever else is going to be in store for him with Grant Morrison's imagination. Because I remember back in the day with Final Crisis, where everyone was always joking, what is Morrison smoking to come up with some of these ideas? Because it's nuts. I want to. There's a great. I want to. It's okay. I want to move over to Aquaman now.
Sure.
I got a great quote there from DeConnick, Kelly Sue DeConnick. I'm going to read it from an interview. She indicated that when she was put on Aquaman, she was trying to get a handle on the character, and her thought process was kind of interesting. And I just thought I'd read it here. She says, Aquaman is this character where he's part of the Justice League, so he's one of the big seven, right? But he's also kind of considered second tier, so he's a little bit under the radar, and I think that makes him an underdog to start with, which is a place I really like to work from. She goes, I'm writing my Aquaman. I've done my research, and I don't want to scare anyone. This is not a reboot. We're not even renumbering, but there was something about the Momoa twinkle in the eye, that little bit of swagger. I found that really appealing. And then there's really something visceral about water and primal about the ocean. And I really got interested in that. And she says, the question that I always ask when approaching any character is, where does their pain come from? Very interesting character. Very good question to ask. Where does their pain come from? What is their core wound? And how is that played out in their power set? Can you connect their wound to their gift? And how is it played out in their personality? And then what kinds of conflicts does that suggest? And I think that's really good because she's going to be building on Jeff Johns' Aquaman run, she said. And Jim Lee actually, I think, pissed DeConnick off a little bit. Jim Lee actually spoiled some of the storyline.
Really?
And basically, the wound that Aquaman has is, as a little boy, he always walked toward the ocean, and his mother abandoned him. He was raised by his father. And his mother, who is of Atlantean origins, and his father was human. And, he'd always walk out toward the ocean. And here's this kid that could communicate with fish and draw them in, but he could never communicate with his mother.
His mom.
And there's how she's going to draw on that. It's going to be very interesting. And, I know that in some corners, DeConnick is hit and miss with some readers, but I really like what I'm hearing. You know, how it plays out and how she executes that, I don't know, but I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's really, really interesting, taking Aquaman to a place that he largely hasn't been. I don't claim to be the biggest Aquaman fan of all time, and I don't claim to be this database of knowledge of his history. But I haven't seen a lot where we really get to deal with his mother past the extent of her dying, and his relationship. And I think that that's pretty relatable trauma, and like, the fact that he has the ability, like you said, to pull in all these creatures of the deep, but never pull in and communicate with his mother, I think is really, like, emotionally a great way to set the tone for the book. The reason at first I would have been skeptical about the swashbuckling swagger of Aquaman, but now not so much, because if you guys have been paying attention to Aquaman, he is no longer the ruler of Atlantis. Mera is. He left Mera to rule over Atlantis. So it's it's very curious to explore what does I don't want to say unhinged, but like, a less responsible Aquaman do. He's not trying, for the great majority of Aquaman stories, he's either at the throne or he's fighting for the throne. So what do we do when Aquaman doesn't really give a shit about the throne? Who is Arthur Curry without the throne of Atlantis? And then I think that this poses a really good question, because, again, not only is he off the throne, his desire is not to attain it. His desire has nothing to do with it. And I think that this ultimately will be a really good exploration of the character, especially if done right. Like I said before, what's important to me as a comic book reader, and I think it's largely important to most people, is that you stay true to the character in a somewhat broad sense, and you're able to interpret the character in your own way that adds onto that and doesn't directly, dismerit the great things that have happened before. And if what she's saying is true, it sounds like that's how she's going to approach it. She's going to interpret Aquaman in her own way without totally disrespecting some of the great stories that came before him, like Jeff Johns, like Peter David, and other, and another number of writers. So I'm pretty excited for it. I don't know who's doing the art on the book. I wish Stepan Sejic was back on it, because he is awesome. But story-wise, I'm invested in it. I'm all for it. I think, everybody deserves a year one book. Everybody always wants to be the writer to, kind of put their hand or to make their print on the walk of fame for every character. Frank Miller did it with his year one, and I'm interested to see what DarkKnight does with Aquaman.
And, I also thought it was interesting as well. She makes the comment that she said, well, I'm just going to read it. She says it better than I could summarize. She says, the approach for Aquaman has always been that he's essentially mixed race, right? He's half Atlantean, half human, so he doesn't belong in either place. And the idea is that each place rejects him for that. But my feeling is that in contemporary society, we cannot play the beautiful, literally bulletproof white boy off as facing bias because of his mixed parentage. So she touched a little bit on the politics there that she didn't really want to go, and she didn't think playing the mixed race angle would work because he was basically a white guy. So that's kind of interesting there. So she thought it was disingenuous at best and cruel at worst. So she said to herself, okay, well, what else do we have to work with? And what she chose to go with is a tonal shift and grounding Aquaman more in mythology and less in more Wonder Woman and less Superman in terms of mythology, grounding him in mythology. And her first story arc is going to involve Aquaman having amnesia, being sort of rejected by the sea, and he wakes up on a shoreline, and he meets a lot of other strange people that have also been rejected by the ocean and the gods of the ocean as well. And so there's that theme of abandonment again, and then as he remembers who he is, probably that central pain that he experiences, how does it form? How does it define who he is? Because she is basically hinting that this is sort of like Batman Year One. This is Aquaman Year One. So,
I mean, I think that the concept is super interesting, and I think it will largely inform how he approaches his own trauma. Kind of rediscovering things in a totally different light. I think will progress the character for the modern age. So it gets me excited about what she has to offer. I'd say I disagree with the fact that like it's disingenuous to say that somebody of a different race or a different species, for that matter, cannot be discriminated against because they're white. You know, call the call the kettle black or whatever because I'm a random white guy talking about it. But once any like especially it's shown throughout history, whether or not it's a race or an ideal, people will find a way to demonize you for your differences. And he's a totally different species, albeit, yes, a white guy, but it doesn't mean that white people could never have been discriminated against. Obviously, in history, not to the same degree that other cultures or ethnicities have, but it's not impossible. It's not like it's never happened. Julius Caesar was olive colored. His slaves were largely Caucasian because one of his thought process was his golden skin and the golden skin of his race made him superior biologically to everybody else. So it's not like it hasn't happened throughout history. It's just that people choose to ignore those things. And I think that Aquaman being a totally different species, once he gets out in the public, you know, into the public eye as Aquaman, is it like it's not disingenuous. So you're saying Superman's entire race rise to fame being discriminated against for being an alien is disingenuous. You're saying Lex Luthor, his entire premise for hating Superman is because he's an alien. You're saying that's disingenuous? I drop a hard disagree on. Although again, that doesn't sully my impression of what she's going to do with the character. I'm largely excited for what's going forward, but I do heavily disagree with that statement in particular.
Yeah, I'm not. It's hard to say in the context. She says, "I think it is that is disingenuous at best, and I don't know, cruel at worst." So I'm not entirely sure what she meant by that. I think that I think what she was trying to do. I think what she's trying to do is rather than focus on the sense of abandonment because of race solely on Aquaman, I think she's gonna. It actually involves an entire group of people that Aquaman meets that have also been abandoned by the sea. So whenever comic book writers, a lot of times the best way to avoid causing controversy, especially, let's face it, in this toxic political climate and culture war we live in right now,
right?
Sometimes the best way to avoid uncomfortable topics is to sort of generalize it or to create, you know, it's funny how you can get away with racism if you create a brand new race in a comic book.
Right.
You know, Star Trek can have a better story about race dealing with two alien races than, but yet if we have a movie about race dealing with real people and real races on our planet, you know, people get all upset. And whereas, you know, if it's a Star Trek show with two crazy looking alien species, no one gets upset by it. That's one of the advantages of comic books, is that you can sort of convey those meaningful messages, frankly, even to racists. And they'll actually have an impact, and that's one of the great things about comic books. But yeah, no, I'm not sure what she meant by that, but I'm not sure what to make of it.
Well, I think, you know, the point you were getting at is further exemplified in the notion that it's all identity politics. You know, the reason they can get away with it making totally separate races and spaces because nobody identifies as that race or that type of being. You know, on the point of like the direction that Kelly Sue DeConnick is going to go with the story, by no means do I think that she's going to try and fulfill any sort of political agenda against the notion that white people can or cannot be discriminated against. The fact that she's ignoring it and again straying more towards the mythological, the oceanic mythological side of things, I love. Like, I think that political stories have their time and they have their place, and they have a way of being executed without targeting anybody. But it also doesn't mean it's a bad story for overtly just ignoring it. You know, even though I disagree with the statement she made in the interview, based on what I'm interpreting it as, I think that the story she's going to craft doesn't have a political agenda. I think it's strictly emotional, and I think that it's going to, you know, drive the character, like I said, into it's going to push the character into new heights emotionally as a character and as someone who, you know, can feel. And I think the story sounds interesting as hell. I'm super down for exploring the mythology of the ocean and Aquaman, and you know, again, making it an underwater Wonder Woman approach, I'm with it. I'm totally
I
down
think it's
for
good.
it.
I actually have. I have. I've always liked the comics writing more or less. I love her bitch planet. When she wants to write and be sarcastic about politics, she's actually really good at it.
Mm.
I will admit, I boycotted her last few issues of Bitch Planet because she spoke out against Howard Chaykin's divided states of America, and I'm a huge proponent of the First Amendment. And so I admit I got upset. She was telling people not to buy it and putting don't don't buy divided states of America because it was transphobic and all this jazz. And I did my own little protest. I just didn't buy it. So I have a gap in my collection, but that was my own personal thing. I still respect her as a writer.
I think it's even more respectable that you had a major disagreement with something that she feels strongly on and are still able to acknowledge the fact that that doesn't affect her quality of writing, and it may not, 100% indicate who she is as a person overall, because our exposure to these people is very limited. Although, first impressions do matter, they are not the end of the world. And I think it's almost more respectable that, again, you heavily disagreed with something she had to say and you acknowledge it, but you can still also acknowledge the fact that she's a great writer and a great storyteller.
Oh yeah, she is. She is.
It's easy enough to just read the work of somebody who you agree with on every single level imaginable. But when you can make that differentiation, and again, the only analogy I can make is like making the differentiation between what your taste is and what is objectively good is, intertwined there, tastefully. What she was saying about the Howard Chaykin story tastefully does not agree with what you like, or agree with how you feel about things, but you're able to acknowledge that. And I think that, the people in the chat, that's largely something to think about is, look at the things for the storytelling,
And well, putting this all in perspective, so far and this goes back to the earlier point that I was making at the beginning that we've been building on, and that is that I'm correcting myself. I'm changing my mind. I think I was too pessimistic, and perhaps at the beginning. I do think that there are signs of hope here. I think with Green Lantern, I think with the wish, Grant Morrison's approach in Green Lantern. Hey, Peanut. My daughter's going for a bath. But with the hopeful approach in Green Lantern, Grant Morrison, I think with the Conic on Aquaman, with it might be some grim and grittiness there, but I think that we got some good foundations going on here. And yeah, so it isn't all dark, and it isn't all quite like Justice League, and even Batman. Even Batman, I wouldn't describe as dark so much as I don't know actually how I would describe Batman. Look, we have Superman and Batman left. It's 7:30. We've got another probably 30 minutes. We try to keep this to 2 hours. But what do you want to talk about next, Batman or Superman?
I mean, we might as well get my Batman rant out of the way, I guess.
All right. Well, yeah, you said it, so rant away.
So, one of the things that I want to preface here is I think part of the reason why I'm largely a little bit more negative about what's going on in the DC universe is I feel like my favorite characters are the ones that are ultimately getting the shaft, and that might be a component as to why I feel the way I do. Another component, again, is just the way I see the organization or the way I interpret what's being said out in public. Just doesn't bode well for me. When it comes to Batman, Tom King's Batman is very hit or miss. And one of the things I had actually almost suggested that we discuss was, now that we're at about the halfway mark of Tom King's Batman, is looking back at the best and worst things that he's, told throughout his time on Batman and
Certainly, go ahead.
What we foresee for the future. But a general overview of that now, his Batman's been very, very, very hit or miss for me. The first couple arcs were okay. They were solid. They were definitely elevated by fantastic art. He introduces a lot of really interesting emotional concepts. I think my biggest flaw with him is in trying to humanize Batman and kind of show him as an emotionally stunted man, which I'm not arguing against. I think he goes a little bit too far, Bruce is emotionally stunted. There's no question about it. He's a man fucking, excuse my language, swinging around on rooftops in a Kevlar bat costume. There's no doubt in my mind the man's not emotionally stunted, and he's ultimately pursuing this mission of a child who lost his parents. But he's also arguably the second smartest man in the DC universe.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me try to focus your thoughts. What does in the first, we're 54 issues into Tom King. I'll ask you first. What does Tom King, in your opinion, get right about Batman? Now, don't tell me what's wrong with him. What is he getting right so far that you liked in his first 54 issues?
I think that he, like I said, partly before, he ultimately understands the concept that Batman is emotionally stunted and isn't afraid to show that. I really enjoyed the Mr. Freeze arc for the most part. It had some plot holes, but what he was doing with Bruce and how he was developing further on, the aftermath of the wedding, I thought was really, really interesting. And Bruce not being able to, and Bruce ultimately kind of losing control on things. Like, this is the thing that makes very few things make Bruce Wayne lose control. And we've seen it on very few occasions. It was, the most notable ones that I can think of was when, he was on Venom, in Hush, when he almost beats the Joker to death, and what he's doing right now, and how he beat the living piss out of Mr. Freeze. I ultimately really enjoy that, and I enjoyed a lot of the earlier thematics that Tom King explores, in that he's beginning to acknowledge a little bit more of the world around him. And now, he's a little bit more closed off, but back then, especially, I honestly think Tom King's best issue of Batman is Batman #1, when Bruce is, and that to me shows that he has some level of understanding of the character. Batman issue 1, for those of you who haven't read it or don't remember, Bruce was trying to stop a terrorist attack, a plane from colliding with a major social hub of Gotham City. And the Justice League aren't around. And again, solid thumbs up to DC editorial for being like, yeah, these people are off doing these things. We can confirm it. The Justice League is not around to help him. And he poses the question of whether or not he dies a good death, and about how what ultimately motivates him again is his parents, not only the death of his parents, but how he idealizes them and how he feels they would react to him doing what he does. And that's one of the biggest things for me. Like, that issue, I think, was absolutely beautiful, where Batman thinks he's going to die. He does his best to save the city, and he saves the city, but he's going to collide with this massive body of water. The impact and the surface tension of the water would ultimately kill Batman. And he asks Alfred, and he's talking to Alfred, the most important member of the Bat family, about it. His guiding light. He says, Alfred, is this a good death? Would they be proud of me? And I'm not going to lie, I'm a grown, well, at the time I was like, 18, 19, still grown somewhat. Yeah. I almost shed a tear.
Yeah, no, it was well done, and it's not a coincidence. It seems some of the best Tom King scenes. In fact, Alfred. I would argue the best Tom King scenes always involved Alfred. And I have to say this. I gotta do some motions here. What I love about Batman issue 1, it's so hilarious. I remember I did poke fun at it a bit, because Tom King writes a scene where, because I'm thinking to myself, how on earth is Batman going to stop a airliner from crashing anywhere? And he's talking to, I think he's talking to Duke, and Duke runs the calculations. I don't know how, but I guess he's a genius. He figured it out. Runs the calculations.
Back computer, I guess.
Yeah, back computer. And then he feeds to Batman the angle that he's got to jump off the bridge. And then he's in the Batmobile. He jumps off the bridge. He then uses the ejector seat in the Batmobile to shoot himself out of the Batmobile as the plane is flying. And as he shot out of and he lands on the plane, perfectly timed. And then he uses some rope from his bat belt to somehow steer the ailerons of this airliner. It's the most, frankly, ridiculous thing. But
I
there
mean,
was, it was such a well-written character story with his comment and his dialogue with Alfred that you could sort of forgive the outrageousness of what he was able to pull off. And because he's not Superman, he's not super powered, and yet what he did was insane, and he managed to pull it off. And I actually believed it. I at the end, I actually believed that, oh my God, maybe Batman could really do that.
I mean, I see what you're saying. I mean, I think that's one of the situations that obviously, like, the suspension of disbelief comes into place. I mean, we do live in a world where Superman exists and a plethora of other characters. So at that point, that wasn't like, I've seen Batman beat the shit out of Darkseid. So that wasn't, that was the least of my worries. Just the character study I thought was absolutely beautiful. And again, I think that's one of the many reasons why I am ultimately very, very critical of his run, because he's written good Batman. That's the worst part, I think, is that, like, everything hasn't been bad. It's like you have a great story arc and a mediocre story arc, and a great one and a mediocre and a great one and a horrible one. And then the cycle continues, largely, I thought his first arc was a little bit slow, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. The I Am Suicide, again, I thought it was still a really interesting character study. I thought that the way he executed in the dialogue and mainly the dialogue, I thought was really, really choppy. That was like my biggest complaint in the beginning. But the character study that Batman is ultimately a suicide mission, and his fulfillment to see his parents again is beautiful. I love it. I don't give a shit what anybody says. You can dislike it, and that's fine, and I'm not going to criminalize you for it, but I love it. I think it's a powerful, powerful thing. And is it really far-fetched to say that a boy at 8 years old that had just lost the two most important people in his life didn't consider suicide?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It played really well, and it played really well. And that's the strength of Tom King, is his individual stories. And exactly. The irony here is that even though we're at issue 54, he's going to go to apparently 103 issues. He's got this long arc. Bane's the main villain. He's behind the scenes manipulating Batman. The big question is, can a happy Batman be an effective Batman? And the suggestion is maybe not, because Selina left him and now his life's a mess, and he maybe beat up Mr. Freeze. And so right now all that's up in the air. But all these, what I find, it's so ironic, but I can, like Batman issue 1 that you gave a good example of. And then there's Batman. I'm gonna probably get the issue numbers wrong, but Batman Annual number 2 is an example, even though that might be out of continuity. But I like parts of the War of Jokes and Riddles. I thought were pretty good. I liked individual issues along the run, but as a narrative,
oh yeah,
as a narrative itself, I don't think it fits very well. But like individually, if I could
pick out stories, yeah,
I could take the one shot here and there. Even the last issue with Nightwing 54, I thought it had maybe some structural issues, whatever. But even that was not a bad story. It was about cucumber sandwiches that I made some jokes.
I was waiting for you to bring it up.
But I mean, cucumber sandwiches. Can you imagine? Can you imagine spending 12 hours fighting crime, and you're like a 12-year-old kid, and you get home and your master Batman is saying you're starving to death, and all you get to eat is cucumber sandwiches? I'm gonna
put a challenge out there to whoever watches this video and wants to prove themselves to be the biggest Comic Boom fan of all time. Can you please make a shirt that says cucumber sandwiches, come on, and like the bat symbol or something in the background, like, and just send it to the man?
Yeah, no,
I'd love to see that happen, man. Hell. I 100% agree with what you just said there. I think that the overall story, or the overall narrative that Tom King is trying to push, is confused, it's uninformed, and it's I think it's mostly him misunderstanding. the character and what the character represents on some levels. But those smaller character arcs where he can really just focus on the interaction and the interplay between what the character is thinking, feeling, and doing with other characters is fantastic.
Yeah.
All of Tom King's best stories were small in the Batman.
Well, I just want to, I'm going to defend him a bit, and I'm going to take issue with something you just said, because I slightly disagree with it, or I would state it a different way. When you say that, when you say that he doesn't understand Batman, when I listened to his interview with John Satris on Word Balloon, and they actually read one of my questions on it, because I asked him the question that was read, and the question I asked was, why does Batman pray beside the Joker? Like in issue 49, Batman gets on his knees at the church and prays beside the Joker instead of, because the Joker was going to kill himself, but Batman nonsensically got on his knees, and I didn't understand that. And Tom King made the comment, he thought that was a great question. And he goes and he gives this long explanation, and it was a good one. I thought that he feels that there's something wrong with Batman, almost, that he's so against killing that he loads up Arkham Asylum. He's so against killing, and he'll go to ridiculous lengths even to save the Joker's life. There's something that's in Batman that he can't bring himself for his villains to die, and so I can believe that, and I think there's ample evidence for that the whole thing that Batman doesn't kill, but the problem is that it did not translate well in the comic. That was the thing. So if that was what King was trying to suggest with that scene, it failed. I didn't think about that when I saw that scene. I thought Batman was nuts. He didn't say a word throughout the issue. He was silent. He said nothing. He barely hit the Joker. He wasn't even poisoned. There was no suggestion that he was injured or debilitated in some way. But yet I actually think Tom King, in his mind, Tom King had an idea of what Batman was supposed to do, but I think it was a failure of getting the art on board and a failure of having adequate narration. He needs more omniscient third-party narration, or somebody explaining in the background what's happening, because he relies too much on his artist. He's got the best artists in the business, but they're not miracle workers. Clayman is fantastic. And the other Joel is fantastic. Yeah, but Michael Janin, fantastic artist. But some things you have to spell out a little bit more, and that's sort of my issue.
One of the places where I think his Batman most suffers is the fact that there is no internal monologue for Batman. Most of my favorite Batman stories, you get a very direct, and whether or not it's stated explicitly in his internal monologue, you get a direct idea of how Batman's feeling, because again, there can be misinterpretation between the artist and what is written for them on the script. I think that moment in the church is ultimate. And I think it's a proponent. And one of the problems I have with this Batman is I think he ultimately downplays Bruce Wayne's intelligence, his skills as a detective. You're telling me Batman couldn't think of a way to disarm the Joker and prevent him from dying? We've seen him do things, and I appreciate, and this is largely, I think this is largely a statement that I have to make on his Batman run. I appreciate some of the emotional things that he's trying to bring to the surface. I do not think it's executed well. I don't think it correlates with Batman as a character and what we've seen even in the recent past. And I think that's the biggest problem for me, because one of my, again, yeah,
but Dark Knight, you understand that's intent. The purpose of Tom King doing that, according to Tom King, is you're right. Bruce Wayne's off his game. Bruce Wayne wouldn't be that stupid. The reason why he was that stupid, if we're to believe Tom King, is that he's off his game because his relationship with Selina. He was trying to plant the seeds, and I don't think he succeeded, but in his mind he did. Right. He was trying to plant the seeds that being in love with Selina was off his game, and that being a happy Batman can't be an effective Batman, and it's Bane manipulating him behind the scenes, and Bane wants to have that effect on Batman. So that's sort of Tom King's excuse for all this sort of behavior that we take issue with.
I mean, again, it could just partly be in the way that I interpret Batman. You know what I mean?
I agree with you. It doesn't work. I don't think it works. I'm just telling you that there's a disconnect to what Tom King thinks is showing up on the page and what actually is.
I agree. Here's the thing, man. I think that the thing that bothers me about that, or about this situation the most, is that he sacrifices other things to try to get his point across that I don't think necessarily need to be sacrificed. You know what I mean? I feel like he can get his point across narratively and through character interplay without sacrificing certain things. And I think that's the problem, that ultimately you don't need to, you can sacrifice, or you can put into place the notion that Bruce is not on his game. Do you have to make him an idiot? I don't think so. I think there could have been a way to approaching that situation and kind of exemplifying the same ideas that he wanted to get across with the Batman's relationship with Joker without making Batman look like a total idiot. He doesn't say anything the whole time. And again,
just a quick point on that. I always thought it was kind of funny during the Mr. Freeze run when Bruce Wayne goes to the washroom and he rips the urinal off the wall. Yeah. I think to myself, I can't believe there wasn't a single member of that jury that didn't go to take a piss and say, did you guys see what happened in the washroom?
That's like one of the things I was talking about. I love like the emotional weight of that whole moment, right? Like the guy is so bottled up and emotionally stunted that he has no way to express himself other than throwing this urinal, like ripping it out of the wall and throwing it, right? Has a lot of significance there. But at the same time, it's a big gaping plot hole. How does no one in the restaurant hear him both rip a urinal out of the wall and smash it? How does he get out? I mean, I know he's rich, but like, are you going to pay people to unsee him throwing a urinal at the thing? Like,
yeah, I don't.
How does nobody hear that and like run into the bathroom to see what the hell's going on?
Like, yeah, I mean, imagine you're a male member of that jury, along with Bruce Wayne, and you went to take a piss right after Bruce Wayne. You hear this huge loud banging noise. You go in, you see Bruce Wayne just threw a urinal against the wall. And then about 3 hours later, you're sitting in the jury room and Bruce Wayne's trying to tell you that Mr. Freeze is innocent. I mean, my first comment would be, let me get this straight. You're the guy with the anger issues that threw the urinal against the wall, right? And you want us to what? It's like,
yeah, I mean, I mean, here's how I would have written that situation out. There's a guy in the bathroom. Bruce didn't realize there was anyone else in the bathroom. He hears obviously the loud noise that comes out of it. The guy walks out of the bathroom. Bruce Wayne hands him $100 bill and says, "You did it."
Yeah.
That like it would have had good comic relief. It would have relieved Tom King of that massive plot hole. And like it would have made sense. It's just I mean, not to toot my own horn here, but I think I wrote a pretty good scene.
Well, he did, and actually Bruce Wayne did pay himself. He actually bribed himself onto the jury in the jury pool to begin with.
Right.
That was a stab. Which,
well, I mean, I think that was, some people really don't like that. I thought it was a positive thing because ultimately, Batman's goal is to prove Mr. Freeze's innocence, and he will go to any length to do so. And I think it's also, there's nothing else to be said about that, in my opinion. But I thought that was fine. I was just like, you know what? He realized he messed up. He wants to make amends for his mistake. Tom King's Batman run overall has had some really great stuff, and he's been fortunate enough to have some really top-notch talent. You know what I mean? Like the second one shot he did with Mitch Garage, not the roof sex, but the Swamp Thing issue, I thought was fantastic. I loved that issue. That was the moment where like all of my negativity on Mitch Garage drawing Batman dropped. It was just. And I think that the best part about it is the biggest revelation of that book comes through Swamp Thing, not Batman. Batman is a framing device in that issue, nothing more. And I loved it. Again, really harping on the notion that Tom King's best Batman stories and his best stories in general when it comes to his comic book work are small scale, based on character interactions, and don't try to overcomplicate things. I think ultimately that's why Heroes in Crisis is probably going to fail, because, you know, editorial mandates are making it bigger than something that he ever wanted to write. And to be honest with you, if I were to have any confidence in Heroes in Crisis, it would have been Heroes in Crisis as the 6-issue story arc that Tom King originally wanted to write.
Well, why don't do you mind if we segue into Heroes in Crisis right now?
That's fine.
Because I think because it's related to Tom King, and we both know Tom King, and we both have strong opinions about his writing.
I mean, I've also met Tom King on a number of occasions, man. Super nice guy. You know,
I've never had that privilege of meeting him, but hopefully one day he'll come to the Calgary Comic Con. But what I just wanted to say something quick about Heroes in Crisis. When I was listening to John Satras did an interview with Brian Bendis, and Bendis gave a compliment, and he said that he wasn't giving it lightly. He actually said that he's read the first issue of Heroes in Crisis and he knows what's going to be about. And he actually said it's one of the best comic book stories, period, that he's ever read. Like that came from Bendis. Now, whether you like Bendis or not, I mean, you got to admit Bendis has made some fantastic crafted some fantastic comic book tales, and he says he think it's going to be epic. So it's going to be interesting to see. And just to build on King, the best King stories. I think I'm hoping his Batman run's going to end on a high note, because he's so good at those interpersonal relationships, like you say, with Alfred, and you look at Mr. Miracle. I find Mr. Miracle getting a little bit mundane, a little bit too mundane, a little bit too boring, but he does have some funny moments in the interactions between Big Barda and Mr. Miracle. So he can actually play off romance pretty well between a couple. And if he actually put his mind to it, there should have been a lot more romance between Selina and Bruce in those first 49 issues. Agreed. But there wasn't. We never saw a lot. We never saw a lot of communication or between them. In fact, it was even something that Selina herself mentioned in issue 50 that, you know, we rarely talk. And so, you know, if he puts, say, the last 10 or 15 issues before issue 103, if he focuses more on Selina and Batman getting together, that's what I hope. We could really get an epic story. And Heroes in Crisis, the idea of a sanctuary where all the heroes and villains go who are royally screwed up because of the ridiculous amount of violence they find themselves in, that is a pretty dark story when you think about it. And
it's a great concept. It's an absolutely, and it's, again, you know, it's you know, I think it perpetrates so far what we've said largely about his Batman run, is that he has these really great concepts, and we'll see if he can execute them. You know, I think that brings a certain level of realism, and some people would argue, well, it's comic books. Realism doesn't really have a place. It does, because that's how we connect with the stories the most. When there is some sort of ember of realism, I think the idea is great. You know, and quickly addressing what Bendis said, again, I give little to no credence to what people are saying, like, out in the open, because I think they'll support, especially with DC right now, they'll support their colleague's book no matter how good it is. You know, I saw a lot of reviews of people saying Batman 54 is his magnum opus issue, is better than anything he's ever written on Batman, or magnum opus in terms of Batman. Largely disagree, but so I would say that I will largely ignore what other people are saying about Heroes in Crisis, and will develop my own opinion about things. I don't want to get my hopes up too high. I'm going to kind of sit in the middle ground and say I like the idea. Yeah. I hope that the reason he wrote that terrible Booster Gold story arc and that terrible Ivy story arc will culminate in something good, at least. Yeah. I want it to happen. Because I was really excited when he had announced that he was doing a story arc featuring mainlining Poison Ivy. It's interesting, and
it is. And I just want to give a Tweakster in our chat said that only good story in his opinion was I Am Bane and the War of Jokes and Riddles, in his opinion. And I think that goes back to our earlier point that those stories in isolation from the larger narrative can actually be seen as pretty good self-contained stories. I Am Bane was a great story. War of Jokes and Riddles, I thought was, I actually quite liked the ending. I like the fact that the Joker prevented Batman from killing the Riddler. That was pretty good. That was very unexpected. And so he has these moments that I think are worthy, and hopefully Heroes in Crisis, it's got the potential to have lots of those types of moments.
You know, I'm gonna for me, the War of Jokes and Riddles was one of those things that was a decent idea, but was largely not executed well. I still don't think I've really fully developed my opinion on the end of that story. Part of me thought it was really interesting. The other part of me was like, no. So I won't comment on that because that is largely up in the air for me. As a story arc, I don't like the War of Jokes and Riddles. I think it was almost pointless. I don't think it really has much of an impact at all on where I don't. If you're going to tell a story in the past, you better be damn sure that it affects the future. And I don't see it affecting the future at all. I don't remember where I was.
I think that one of the issue, the reason why I like the ending of War of Jokes and Riddles is that it was actually one of the few moments that, because I told you before, you and I disagreed very strongly on the Joker last week. You hold Joker in much more high regard than I do. I think the Joker is the most overrated villain in the entire echelon of heroes, period, hands down. But with the Joker, for the first time, I could actually understand why the Joker is so narcissistic. He's such a narcissistic prick that there's no way that if anybody is going to get to Batman, he'll be damned if it's going to be some loser like the Riddler. It's going to be me. I'm the Joker. No, I'm the one that's going to make the Batman kill.
The concept is great. That concept is great, and that's actually my favorite part about the War of Jokes and Riddles. That it's ultimately and it plays into Scott Snyder's Batman and Joker relationship, where the Joker has to be the one that is the antithesis to the Batman. He has to be the antithesis, not a what's the word I'm looking for? Not an antagonist, but the very thing that embodies everything that Batman is against. And the fact that he again couldn't relieve that duty to the Riddler or anyone else.
Well, the whole idea of the Joker, his greatest enemy, saving him from crossing the line.
Yeah.
The Joker that saved the Batman in many ways, and that's what gave that some sort of resonance there. And for the first time, I actually had some token respect for the Joker. I could understand his insanity and his narcissism in a context of a story that made sense, as opposed to just he's always rattling off some crazy crap, that philosophical nonsense. It was the first time I felt like I understood some of the craziness of the Joker. But
no, there's a lot of credence in that. I don't disagree with you. That's the best part about the whole story. But I honestly think that a large majority, again, I'm a big stickler on dialogue because I think dialogue is a big indicator of the character, obviously, because it's how they're interacting. And I think that, he did not express the characters well in the dialogue. I think that the things that were running parallel in the War of Jokes and Riddles to the main plot, I think, were unnecessary and sloppy. I think you could have just moreover gotten to the point. But the topic, that we had kind of segued to being heroes in crisis. A lot of people are saying that this is going to be a modern day identity crisis, which is very controversial. Some people love it. I'm in that boat. Some people hate it. If this is to be a modern day identity crisis, I embrace that. Again, I embrace the idea that these superheroes who are ultimately, and I think Frank Miller exemplifies this best in his Batman. They are soldiers. They are soldiers for the common good, generally speaking. And soldiers get PTSD. Yeah. And again, not playing down what the soldiers face in the real world. They're facing these things in a fictional universe that have never existed, that don't actually exist. So can can be, you know, elevated higher to the things that these soldiers face. So who's to say that they don't, you know, they don't receive trauma from those events?
I think that I know that you're a big Justice League Dark fan, because there's been some hints in Justice League Dark, and it's led into a big theory as to who's going to be killed off in Heroes in Crisis. And I really like the theory. So this isn't spoilers, this is speculation, but the Swamp Thing has stated in issue 2 of Justice League Dark that he is slowly coming to an end as the Avatar of the Green. He's going to join the Elementals or whatever the.
Oh, if you're gonna say what I think you're gonna say.
So what he's saying is that what they're getting at there, it's Poison Ivy is the one that's going to be killed in Heroes in Crisis, and she's going to be the new Swamp Thing. She's going to be the new Avatar of the Green, basically.
Yeah.
Swamp Thing will still be Swamp Thing, but she's going to be the new Avatar of the Green. It's going to be Poison, but she'll die first, just like Alec Holland died. And really, to me, that theory makes so much sense, because if you look at how Tom King wrote Poison Ivy, which frankly in many ways was out of character to her previous incarnations, suggesting that she's never killed before, which was nonsense. But I mean, again, he's ignoring continuity. But the fact that he's sort of setting up his own character type for Poison Ivy, I think it's gonna, you know, it's a lot. It just fits. You know, the Swamp Thing is still going to exist, but he's just not going to be the Avatar of the Green. He'll be something else. And then Poison Ivy is going to go one step higher.
I think that's a great idea. Although, again, I think what you just pointed out there is you know, the shining example of one of my biggest issues with Tom King is that, like, he has this great idea, but he will do anything to set that idea up. And even if setting up that idea largely doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So he's setting up this, what, you know, if things come to be what you are speculating them to, would be really interesting. But we got that really shitty Poison Ivy arc to get to it. You know what I mean? And it's the same thing again with that particular issue with Batman and the Joker in the church. What he was getting at was ultimately great and beautiful. And this exploration of the character, but the way he did it really sucked. Like, he has this great idea, and again, will do anything, do what it takes to get to that point, whether or not it makes sense or not. And that's the thing that I think ultimately makes me somewhat skeptical of Heroes in Crisis. I'm still going to pick up every issue. I'm still going to buy it. I'm interested in it. I hope Bendis is right. I hope he's not verbally whoring out to his colleagues and just saying that they're great books for the sake of promoting his colleagues. You know, and now that I think about it, Heroes in Crisis comes out this month, the first issue. So
it's sort of like Heroes in Crisis. If I was to venture a guess, you know, to me, Heroes in Crisis is the darker psychological tone of the DC universe, whereas Justice League and maybe Justice League Dark is like that's the more action, the darker toned action. Heroes in Crisis is the darker toned psychological drama on that side of things, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm looking forward to it. I liked Identity Crisis.
I love it.
But the only thing that I wish I liked a lot of the. I wish there was more of a fallout from Identity Crisis. I think they should have went farther. The DC universe should have gone farther in terms of what the consequences of Identity Crisis was. The best. Just a quick aside: Identity Crisis dealt with the mind wiping of supervillains because they found out the secret identity of the heroes, and in the process, Zatanna mind wiped Selina Kyle.
Batman.
My favorite issue. My favorite post Identity Crisis issue was Catwoman confronting Zatanna, which was just a great girl fight, and she basically, you know, she kind of kicked the shit out of Zatanna for mind wiping her.
In Identity Crisis?
No, not in Identity Crisis. It was in an issue of Catwoman after Identity Crisis.
I was gonna say, I was like, she did that to Bruce, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I didn't.
This was post. Like, what I'm getting at is, I want there to be consequences.
Right.
When Heroes in Crisis is done and finished, I actually want there to be consequences flowing from it, because with Identity Crisis, there wasn't, people sort of forgot about it. It's kind of a big issue, but then people forgot about it because it's too uncomfortable. And that if we deal with it, that means it's going to affect us. I don't know. To me, I don't know.
You know,
I don't know.
Well, the point you're making about Identity Crisis tackling the more grounded psychological landscape of the DC universe, I think if done well is a great idea. I think it's really important for the DC or for storytelling in general, especially the comic book medium in a shared universe, to tackle both the huge high flying action and grandiose storytelling and the character studies. I think to exemplify both things are equally as important as one another. And if executed well, it'll be great. And you know what? There's always a chance I like it more than Justice League. And I hope that's the case for sure. I hope that this story is the next Identity Crisis for me, if not better, because I loved Identity Crisis. And I think Tom King has an interesting way of approaching things. I you know, if if we had to suffer through a shit Booster Gold and Poison Ivy arc for nothing, will I be mad? Probably. But if it pays off, I will probably largely forget about it. So
well, we're gonna be gifted with some Clayman art, and that's always a good thing. So we're gonna have a lot of pretty pictures to look at. All right. We got two other things. We're at 2 hours here. It's 8 o'clock my time, probably 10 o'clock your time.
Yep.
We have potentially, well, we got Superman and Hawkman that we can deal with. I guess we'll do a Superman next.
Yeah, we can shotgun those real quick.
I'll shotgun them. I'll start with Superman since you started with Batman.
Sure.
The more I'm reading Superman in action, the more I'm enjoying it. I'll just say it. I actually feel that Bendis. I'm more confident where Bendis is going with this, or I think he might be going with, in building up this new galactic circle, this cabal. I love the idea of that. I love Rogol Zaar. The art's fantastic. The narrative, he feels in control of the story. I love this new Red Mist, this villain. I love the idea of a mafia in Metropolis that very carefully monitors that they don't even say certain key words, because Superman will pick it up with his super hearing. It's really brilliant writing. I like it. It's really, really well done. I can't believe it hasn't been written that way before. Bendis has put a lot of work into this. I love the ideas. I'm really looking forward. I look forward to every issue. It's usually the first ones I read. I love, and a quick shout out to Supergirl. I'm actually impressed with Mark and Draco's work on Supergirl. It's a little wordy, but I love the fact that it's Kara's on the hunt for Rogol Zaar. I love the fact in Action Comics with the Earth being in the Phantom Zone and Rogol Zaar creating an army of Phantom Zone criminals to attack the Earth. That Star Labs accidentally transported the Earth into the Phantom Zone. It was actually Star Labs that did it accidentally. He's weaving so many of these elements from different aspects of Superman's history. He's weaving into the story, and I appreciate it maybe a little more than maybe casual readers, because I've read Superman for 40 years. So I actually see that Bendis, I got to give him credit. He actually did his homework on this stuff. And so I'm more than willing to forgive a Wally West, Barry Allen screw up in hair color if we get some good Superman build up here. So
yeah, I mean, it's what he's doing in Action Comics, I think, far exceeds his work in Superman when he takes a little bit more grounded approach to characters. You know, his Superman, I think, is largely overwritten, but what he's doing in Action Comics seems to be working. I'm going to run to the restroom real quick, so if you want to keep rolling on about that, I'll be right back, okay?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, one of the things, I'll make some quick comments for those in the chat, that Bendis, it's got to be clear about Bendis is that his dialogue in Superman and in Action is definitely something that could be improved upon. When he's writing members of the Justice League, you know, they don't really sound like their voices. Barry Allen, I think, sounds almost probably a little bit too much like Peter Parker. I think Batman doesn't really sound like Batman. Even Superman's voice is a little off, but I like the fact that he gets Superman and the angle that he's approaching Superman with about the awesome amount of responsibility that Superman has, and particularly, I mean, the way they did that with the Mist, and the idea of the mafia trying to manipulate Superman, or trying to create distractions and deliberately create crime in Metropolis at different times to distract Superman so that they can do their underworld mafia activities. That frankly is inspired, and surprisingly, I've never come across that angle before, and it's such a great idea. And the anger that Superman has upon discovering that they might be doing that on purpose, and he goes and he pretty much destroys an asteroid field in anger out in space. I think Bendis is slowly building an arc here that's pretty good. One of the things they have in the Marvel universe is the Illuminati, and one of the things that Bendis is bringing in the DC universe is a cabal, what he referred to as the cabal, but it's called the Circle. And it consists of King Tamaran, of Starfire's father, and from the planet Tamaran. And then there was even one of a character of Ran of Star. What's the guy's name? Any event, one of the guardians of the Green Lantern Corps, and there's like three other characters, like three others, and all the members of this circle, they made this pact and this secret, and so something we're gonna be getting that so much history here that's being built up, and I think I hope it lasts more than 6 months. Bendis is the type of guy that he's going on to 24. He can write 24 to 36 issues and not complete a story. He did that with X-Men. He did that with Guardians of the Galaxy, in my view. Too many plot points were left sort of dangling. But hopefully he won't be doing that with Superman, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's tough. I can't comment at length about the current setting, what he's doing with Superman, because I'm a little bit behind him, a couple issues behind. I was largely unimpressed with the first issue of Superman. I didn't really like it. I think that so here's my big thing. So a lot of people were talking about his interaction with Martian Manhunter in issue 1, where he's like, well, why don't you just control everybody? And some people are saying it's like, okay, well, maybe it's a shapeshifter, maybe it's Superman being controlled, in some sense, or like his concept of reality is being manipulated. I feel like that's way too obvious. You know what I mean? Like, he says something that like you can't win with this, because it's like either you totally miswrote Martian Manhunter, or you're being so beyond obvious that like a 3-year-old me could pick up on that. Yeah. You know what I mean? His character.
I think your strongest point, and I agree with it, is that he is struggling with their dialogue. He's struggling with getting a handle on the voices of the Justice League. I think that's quite clear. However, to give him some credit, or to give him some slack, he's starting out, and I'm prepared to sort of let that go, because what he lacks right now in understanding the characters, I think he's really making up for with a very clear, concise, longer narrative game that is already starting to come into focus a little bit, all the pieces, which is very different than the disjointed nature of Scott Snyder's Justice League. So that's to draw a comparison.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with the fact that his overall narrative is really starting to build and show for it. But, and again, it could just be, for me, it could just be that I find dialogue to be incredibly important. Because again, that is the most explicit way in which you see who a character is. And I don't even think that it's a case of not knowing characters. I think it's just poorly written dialogue. Like, and people have talked about this, like in his Man of Steel, one of the reasons why I despise, like, I think it was like issue 3 or 4, he makes Flash on more than one occasion say like, doo doo poo poo caca. What respectable grown man would say that to another group of adults?
Yeah.
Like,
well, that's what I said. That I actually think he writes Barry Allen like Peter Parker, almost like
he
a teenage Peter Parker. And so that was that was very off. I didn't
it
get
was
that either.
so
That was,
jarring. And
yeah.
like even Superman in some degrees in his Man of Steel is just like I get the approach, right? As a father, he's really saying like Superman isn't unhinged, but Superman doesn't have full control on his emotions because Lois and John are gone, and they are his anchor right now. Those are the things that mean the most to him, and the fact that they're not there is worrying him and making him
back now.
anxious.
She's back now. I know you're probably a couple issues behind, but he did. You know, Lois was being a complete bitch. She actually never left the Earth. She was actually on Earth all along, and she communicated with Cat Grant before Clark Kent had to find out that Lois was still on the Earth from somebody else. So he's quite upset with her. So he's going to confront her, and he's already confronted her. But their first conversation will be in the next issue of Superman. So
I mean, from what I understand now, I immediately despise that. We'll see how he handles it.
yeah. Oh,
I mean, I will say this. I don't see how he can fix that. I will also say this. I'm not the professional writer. So people write things every single day in ways that I could never comprehend. So we'll see. I don't like the idea as it stands. But ultimately what I'm getting at here is Superman's biggest flaw, or the thing that hurts him the most right now, is the fact that the two things he loved most are up in the air. He doesn't know what they're doing. He doesn't know how they're doing. And he doesn't have them with him. They are his strength as he stands in the DC universe right now. And I think that, again, he's dealing with powerful thematics here, and he's building a really cool and interesting overarching narrative and playing with the strings of the DC universe really well. But the characterization is horrid. It's horrid.
Well, I will say I will draw a distinction between dialogue and characterization, because I think it's subtle. Because I think that, once he improves the dialogue, because I think in terms of the actions of the characters were in tune with how they normally act, but the dialogue was off. And a quick point about the Lois Lane. The reason why I think it's going to be very easily explained why she never told Superman, and that's because the Red Mist who is the mafia of Metropolis, the head mafia leader. They manipulate and control Superman by creating petty crime to distract him all the time, so that they can do crime on the side. And I think Lois Lane's figured that out. And I think the Red Mist knows that there's some kind of connection between Lois Lane and Superman. And so I think Lois was figuring that if Superman, only by isolating herself so that even Superman, even Clark, did not intuitively know where she was, could she get more information on the Red Mist for her expose. And I think that's why she did that. And that's going to be the explanation. That's my guess.
Well, the one thing that I found consistent throughout, Superman post-Rebirth is that both Clark and Lois have changed in where their priorities lie. Their priorities lie with John. And if you tell me that she leaves her son with his proven to be maniacal grandfather to write an expose, that to me immediately depreciates the character development that Lois has been going through in the last couple of years. I think that will change my opinion of where Lois stands right now in continuity, and not in the best way. You know what I mean? Like, you're telling me she's going to leave her son with a maniac, someone that she completely distrusted from the beginning. Back in the Action Comics, the Oz Effect story arc, she was the first one to call bullshit on Jor-El. And you're telling me she's going to leave her son to go write some goddamn expose? Like, I understand that's her passion, but that's her child.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they fought through like the forces and the powers that be in the universe in like the Superman Reborn to remember her son. That just would not make sense for me. And that would play into the overarching opinion that Bendis doesn't give a shit about continuity. You know what I mean? I think it's
Well, I mean,
almost I
yeah.
think it's almost more important that Bendis read Tomasi and Gleason's run on Superman than most anything else. Not just because it was great, but because that is what leads up to what Bendis is doing the most. That is the most current Superman we have seen to date, besides what Bendis is doing now. And it seems like he's completely ignored what Tomasi
Well,
wrote.
well, fair enough. But I think it's also worth mentioning that Lois Lane as a mother has been fairly liberal, and she certainly lets Jonathan Kent get into an awful lot of trouble and a lot of adventures, uh, even through Tomasi and Gleason's run. And now this is his grandfather, albeit a grandfather that was like, certainly maniacal at one point, but seemed to mellow out by the end of the Oz arc. But still, we just don't know enough, because presumably Lois has a way of communicating with Jonathan, and maybe Jonathan, maybe there's some plot element we don't know yet, so we'll see. But yeah,
I mean, here's where I'm gonna like attempt to disprove that idea. Her exposure to Oz was largely negative, and I think that comparing her, for example, she lets John go out on these crazy adventures with Damian.
Mhm.
Batman, for all intensive purposes, has not been explicitly stated, is probably Jonathan's godfather. I mean, if you look at the post Superman Reborn, the way that they had reinterpreted the continuity, Batman was there the day that Jonathan Kent was born. If anybody, and I'm sure that Batman keeps tabs on Damian, and Lois Lane has to understand that. So the reason she's probably more lenient with her letting him go off and get into trouble with Damian is because she knows Batman is watching.
Yeah.
Who, besides Clark, Batman is Bruce Wayne is probably one of the people that Lois Lane trusts most in the current continuity set forth by Superman Rebirth.
Yeah.
I mean, he was there in delivering John. They trusted him to watch over the fortress as she was delivering John. And to compare that to, the maniacal grandfather who she had met once before and had really negative interaction with, you know what I mean? Like, I can't buy into that, man. You know what I mean? That's just,
well, no, and I guess, I mean, yeah, no, it's hard for me to disagree with that. I can see that it's sort of like he's playing a little bit fast and loose with the previous story. It's almost, if I didn't know better, I would think maybe Tom King would have done something like that.
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah.
But again, it's a minor thing. I mean, I will say this. I think with the whole Oz, I didn't like the Oz storyline, to be honest. I thought it was ridiculously overhyped. And I think that, in fact, it was ridiculously decompressed. It should have been one issue, and I think it was 4, and they glossed the covers up and lithographed the covers, and all it was an angry and pissed off grandfather who at the end sort of mellowed out, but was kind of a jerk, and he never did anything. He basically had a glorified argument with, they had him. It's almost like he almost tried to hurt them, and then he said he loved them, and then he said he was trying to protect them. And I don't think it was Dan Jurgens. I think it was Dan Jurgens who wrote it. I don't think it was particularly good, to be honest with you.
I thought it was okay. I think it was largely redundant. I agree that story arc would have benefited by decreasing the issue count for sure. I would have given it like 2 or 3 issues over 4, and it was definitely overhyped. And again, I would say if you were to consider that even though it was 4 issues, I would almost consider that a 5-act story. Yeah. The first 3.5 to 4 acts were largely the same thing, and it could have been compressed a little bit more.
But it only got good because I think it got the hype because of it was potential connection to Doomsday
Dr.
Clock.
Manhattan, yeah. I agree.
And that never really fell. That completely fell through, more or less, and it wasn't helped by the Doomsday Clock delays, which continued to plague people.
No, I agree with you on that 100%. I just, my biggest thing, and again, if this says anything, I'm a big characterization. I'm a big proponent of staying true to a character while still, you know, I'm also okay with finding ways to introduce your interpretation, but largely, again, like you said, even though the actions were fairly relevant to these characters, the dialogue is the most immediate and the most explicit way at showing who the character is. You know what I mean? It's especially in a comic book where things are shown in frames where you skip a lot of the intricacies of the body language. You know, you have these still frames. So dialogue and internal monologue for me is the easiest indicator of that. And that's where Bendis fails. Again, his Action Comics is great because he's focusing on Metropolis and he's focusing on Superman dealing with mob culture in Metropolis and how that's going to tie into, you know, the overall narrative. And, you know, his Superman just feels a little bit confused for me. I agree with the fact that he's trying to build something and he's playing with all these different strings in the universe. And I think it's incredible, but I think ultimately, you know, it feels like he's a piano player with 4 different keyboards around him and he's trying to have his hand on each keyboard, you know, at the same time, and it's physically impossible.
Yeah.
You know, I think that, you know, like I said, I see where you're coming from with the fact that he had never written these characters before, and there would be some slack if I didn't think that some of the dialogue was just straight bad writing. You know what I mean? I think that there would be a noticeable difference if maybe he just didn't understand the character and maybe it was bad writing. And I think like that's also exemplified in Justice League. Scott Snyder does not understand Barry Allen here. He doesn't. Is it terrible writing? No, because Barry Allen is saying words that a grown man would potentially say in the situation. You know what I mean? I think that's like the biggest identifier. I don't think not only does Bendis not understand some of these characters, it's just that the dialogue is straight bad. And you know, you can, you know, I don't even hide it. You can go back to a review I did, you know, months before when Man of Steel #1 came out. I loved Man of Steel #1. I was all for it. So it's not like I came into this, you know, negatively. I was all for it. And then issue 2 was like, eh. Issue 3 was like, issue 4 made me want to stop reading the book.
Yeah.
So you know, I try to go into these things unbiased, and I will continue to read Bendis's Superman for a while. We'll see, you know, once I get a little bit more taste for what his overall narrative is, and as long as he doesn't screw over some of the characters that I've grown to love over the last couple of years, you know.
I would think that a title then that you would really like if you're not already collecting it is Supergirl, because Mark Andreyko's dialogue is better than Bendis's, and he's just better at dialogue and like word, like all of that. Andreyko does a very good job of getting into Supergirl's thoughts, and he's got the thought boxes, and then she'll also blurt something out verbally in dialogue that's very consistent with the thought balloons and the transition from panel to panel and the art. It's really good. Supergirl is really good. It's awesome. Somewhat compressed too, but Mark Andreyko tells a little bit. Well, you might want to try it because the first 2 issues, it's actually quite good.
No, I'll have to check it out. Do you think I need like the previous knowledge from what came before?
I don't think you need the first. You can just pick up the latest issue. Although if you can get the first issue, I'd get it. Really good.
By that I mean like for example, like the run that came before it, like the Steve Orlando Supergirl.
No. All you need to know is that Supergirl's going out in space. She's interacting with the Green Lantern Corps to try to find Rogolzar, and she's got Rogolzar's axe, right? She's got Rogolzar's axe, and what's really cool is that I kind of don't want to spoil it, but she asks Hal Jordan to use his ring to find out the origin of this axe. And for the first time that Hal Jordan can ever remember, the ring can't answer the question about what's the origin of this axe, or rather, Mogul won't allow that information to be released because it's too top secret for even Hal Jordan. Doesn't have the clearance to know the origins of this axe. And then it even changes shape for Kara, and it's weird. So there's something about this axe that's really special.
That sounds really interesting. I feel like I would probably enjoy that over what's going on in Superman right now.
That's why I'm saying you might want to suggest.
No, I mean I'll probably go pick that up. I'm glad you suggested that to me because when they announced Andreyko was taking over the book, it did pique my interest a little bit, but now I'm definitely gonna go check it out. So
and there's Crypto. And Crypto's with her, so it's her and Crypto, the super dog there. So it's good.
No, that's awesome. And again, just finishing my thoughts briefly on Superman is that I can appreciate again some of the things he's doing. I think that for my taste, I'm just a critical person. When it comes down to it, I'm a very critical person because I want the stories to be good. And in relation to that, when the dialogue was as bad as it was, it really sets me off because I enjoyed the first issue of Man of Steel, and I know it can be great, and I know that he can write solid Superman. I think Man of Steel #1 is, again, amazing. I talk about it at length in a review I did a couple months back, but I will still remain a skeptic. I will continue to read the book and to go through it, and once I feel like I have an overall idea of where he's going with the narrative and where he's going with these characters, I will make the decision of whether or not to continue reading the book. Money doesn't grow on trees, my friend. So I'll try to be as conscious of things as I can, but overall,
I think it's the thing is about Bendis though is that you can probably skip 4 or 5 issues and probably pick up. And every now and then, every writer has the same pattern. Even the ones that are decompressed, they'll go for 5 or 6 issues, and I think even Snyder's going to do that. There's going to be an issue of explanation or a sort of a summary issue that. And Bendis, by the way, Bendis actually has brought one of the Marvel habits with him. He's got that synopsis page at the beginning of each of the Action and Superman runs.
I like that. I
like that a lot.
I really like that.
Yeah, and I frankly, I really wish Scott Snyder would do that with Justice League. I really wish he would do that because it would be very helpful.
No, I agree on that. And one of the questions, obviously we'll transition over to Hawkman soon, that I want to pose is, do you think that this disorganization is ultimately the result of him having his hand in too many pockets? I mean, he's writing 3 different books for his new imprint, along with Superman and Action. I mean, well, I know the guy's been known to write multiple books at a time, but when he writes so many books, that seems to be when his work suffers the most.
Well, I think you may have forgotten my earlier point. I respectfully disagree with you. I actually think that I see the larger narrative. I think what Bendis is working, I see all of Bendis's moving parts right now. I see them clearly. I don't know exactly how they're going to fit, but I see the moving parts and I understand sort of what's going on. And he's communicating with Mark Andreyko, the writer of Supergirl. And there's that subplot with her looking for Rogolzar and the Axe and the Earth's in the Phantom Zone. I find all these moving parts interesting. And so far, I mean, he's made no bones about it. This is a longer arc. It's going to be at least 6 months, as you say. And so far, I'm understanding it and I'm enjoying it. To focus on your point, though, I think that if anything has suffered, if there has been something, I'm going to dare I suggest that it hasn't been Superman or Action yet. Yeah, he's had issues with dialogue, but I don't think that his plot or I don't think it's disorganized. You know what I mean? He's got, dialogue. Will get better. Knock on wood, I hope. But with respect to Scarlet, Murder Incorporated or Murder Incorporated versus United States, whatever that was, and then
Cover.
Pearl and Cover. I like 2 out of 4 of those. The other 2 are sort of hit and miss. I don't know. Bendis has always been sort of a disaster on his creator-owned stuff, even though it's been sort of good. When he wrote Powers, I mean, it was every 3 or 4 months an issue would come out. I finally gave up collecting it, not because I didn't enjoy reading it. It was because it was just too far between. He can't keep a schedule. I'm going to go so far as to say this: his creator-owned stuff is actually good, even when it comes out late. Is because it was actually good Powers. I love Powers. I think it's great. I just started collecting the trade. I'll catch up on the trades, but you know, I'm prepared to give Bendis a lot of slack, and I'll just say this: the guy almost died. He's sort of having an epiphany. He wants to have he named Rogol Zar after his nurse. Did you know that?
No.
The enemy. He named Rogol Zar after the nurse that helped save his life.
Wow, that's nuts.
Her name it's Dr. Rogol. I think it was Dr. Rogel's, and she was very flattered that he named the supervillain after her.
I really like Bendis as a human being. He seems like a genuinely good guy. And I think I might have misworded the point I was trying to get across with the disorganization. I think that ultimately his understanding of some of these characters suffers because he's focusing on so many different things. I don't think he's really put in the time to understand some of these other characters that he's writing with. And I think that by disorganization, I think that he puts these characters in here for the sake of whatever narrative he's trying to tell, but doesn't necessarily know how to write those characters. You know, in Man of Steel specifically, I think even Superman suffered on occasion of Bendis just not really knowing Superman. Like, I think he really understands certain aspects of Superman really, really well. The parentage and, you know, his compassion for people. But then there were other times, you know, where it just felt so unfamiliar to me. And that's somebody who's been like religiously reading Superman for the last couple of years now. So, you know, like I said, I'm going to continue to read this. I'm going to try to be as open-minded as I possibly can. And it could just be because I'm a big stickler on dialogue, and I feel like that's a big indicator of character. You know, we'll see. You know, like I said, I'm going to keep reading it. We're going to see where it goes. Ultimately form a decision once I feel like I've read enough of the material. Yeah, but I can't say that I'm super, super optimistic for his Superman. I'm actually, now that you say it, I'm more optimistic for reading Supergirl right now than reading Superman. So we'll see. Did you have like closing thoughts on that, or did you want to shotgun Hawkman?
No, I need to shut her down here quick. Another 10 minutes. We don't have we can. I don't really have. I suppose we could say a lot about Hawkman. I'll just shotgun Hawkman quick here, and Hawkgirl. I mean, Hawkman is it's well written. Robert Venditti's doing a great job. Hitch, we spoke before about Hitch. What's his name? The artist on Hawkman.
Brian Hitch.
Brian Hitch. Thank you. Anyways, his art. He's always better as an artist, not as a writer. Fortunately, Brian Hitch is just doing the art in Hawkman. Venditti's doing a good job. The whole idea of Hawkman having different lives through different times on different planets, not just Earth, it's pretty inspired. I think it's good. It's an adventure. It's like Indiana Jones in space and all over the place.
Yeah,
it's really fun. And it's got a little bit of a darker tone, but it's an adventurous tone.
Exactly.
And it's like a darker. It almost reminds me of Indiana Jones, which always has an element, sort of like a fun, adventurous horror element to it. So, yeah. And I did my last Hawkman review. I actually wore my Indiana Jones outfit because it was fun. It just had that feel to it, and I even used the Indiana Jones music as an intro because it was just fun. But I like it. To me, it's actually, even though it's dark, it's kind of on the lighter side of darkness so far, I think. But what do you think?
I love Hawkman. It's like I've spoken at length before about how my exposure to Hawkman is very minimal, and most of my knowledge comes from reading up on the events of DC Universe, seeing Hawkman, and then kind of scouring forums and informational pages on the internet trying to get an idea of who the hell Hawkman is, and it comes up with all of these different things that for a large majority of his continuity were not connected. And the thing that I appreciate, and again, it could just be me speaking in ignorance, I think that Venditti is doing a great job at melding what Hawkman fans love about him, like all of these past continuities. He's not throwing any of them away. He's not saying that any of them didn't happen. he's mixing them into one, and making sure that they all coexist alongside what he's trying to pioneer with the character. And I absolutely love it. I think the first couple issues were a little bit more slow paced and expository, and I think that's fine with a character like Hawkman. Like I said, he needed as much explanation as possible where he stood, and like issue 4, much more fast paced. We got a little bit more tell for the, again, a little bit more heart racing Indiana Jones adventure. I love the book, man. Art's spectacular. I will champion Robert Venditti till the day I freaking die. The guy's a great writer. He understands every character that he decides to write. And that shows here with Hawkman. And I love the fact that, as somebody who doesn't have a lot of knowledge about Hawkman's past lives, I feel like by the end of this run, however long it is, I will have a decent understanding of the major components to Hawkman. And that's ultimately what I want to get out of the book, along with a great story. And I think that's what we're getting, and I think that's what we're going to continue to get. So I'm excited to keep reading it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you. So, that was, we'll shut the live stream down now. We'll just, first I want to thank you, Dark Knight. You've thanked me profusely numerous times on your live stream, so I'm certainly going to thank you. This is my first live stream, and I thank you, Dark Knight, for those of you watching. He helped me immensely set everything up, so it would remotely or whatever. So it all worked good, and it seems to have gone well tonight. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Yeah, and I want to promote Dark Knight Nation's channel, Dark Knight Nation on YouTube. Check them out. It's Dark Knight Nation on Twitter as well. I guess you can add to that, Dark Knight. And yeah, I mean, I love talking with you. It's great times. We're probably going to have in the future, as I get used to this, we'll have more people on the live stream as well. Dark Knight and I are sort of getting used to each other, and we're sort of co-hosting things. And I noticed Spike was watching tonight, and I told Spike maybe at some point we'd get him on. I'm not sure if he's on. He's had different Twitter accounts lately, so I don't know if I could have even sent him a link. But anyways, yeah, thanks everybody for watching. Dark Knight, you could, if I missed anything, sign off.
Man. I know I'll continue my trend of thanking you profusely, man. Thanks for having me on. Again, it's always a joy it's always one of the highlights of the week just to sit here and talk comics. And I think that, again, the thing I always stress is that we don't always agree on everything, and that's totally okay, because I think we come to an understanding of where we sit and how we idealize ultimately these fictional stories. And we've come to respect that, I continue to look forward to this every week. I always make it a habit to be like, yo, what are we talking about this week? Like, what am I getting excited for? So, thanks for having me on. Thank you to everybody who's watching. Again, if you aren't familiar with my stuff, Dark Knight Nation, check me out. I'd be more than happy to. I want to continue to help build a community, and that's why, ultimately Comic Boom and I do these weekly shows. And thank you guys. I want to give a shout out, Jason,
a great Jason Fabik interview at Dark Knight Nation's channel on YouTube. Check it out. It's getting lots of views, and it's well worth watching, because Jason Fabik doesn't really seem to give a lot of interviews, so it's worth listening to.
I appreciate that. Well, yeah. So just looking out to the future to come, I do comic book reviews. I do three books per video. I rate them, talk about a little bit of the plot, the art, the story, give my opinions. And again, I've been getting into character interviews. There are potentially some more to come when New York Comic Con rolls around. I do have another one on the back burner that I'm trying to edit. But I appreciate your confidence in me and exposing me to your base of fans. And thanks again. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, Comic Boom.
Yeah, for sure. And as far as myself, videos coming up, I'm gonna probably I didn't do as many videos as I would have liked last week. Today's another busy week of work. I'm gonna try to maybe rattle off 3 to 4 videos. I'm trying to keep my reviews down to 3 to 4 minutes, but that's very, very difficult to do. I'm always inspired by Professor Bill of Comic Book University. I'll give him a shout out too, because it's hard to do that. I also want to give out the Comic Show, Joseph's Books, and also Nerd Scum, my fellow Ink Geeks, and Comic Man Jake. I also want to give a shout out to Spike Valentine. Thanks for watching, Spike. We will definitely get you on here at some point, Spike. I just hopefully you'll have a I don't know. I guess I'll have to confirm a Twitter account for you. But guys, we appreciate everyone who watches us. And yeah, until next time, guys, Comic Boom out. That's my call sign, and Dark Knight.
You guys have a good night. Thanks for watching, and thanks for being comic book fans.
All right. Take care.